Our first item up is public comment. Before I do that, I'll just ask Chris if you've got anything in the way of preliminaries. I know that the staff had your staff retreat last week, and maybe you've got other things to update us on before we jump into our agenda.
Yeah, just we appreciate the opportunity, and as I had said last week, a significant chunk of that time away was spent on our strategic plan, and specifically of the strategic goals the council adopted back in 22, that being safety, infrastructure, built environment, amenities, and high performance organization. We touched on four of those, but overwhelmingly majority of our time is in the safety area, in preparation for our work session 2 weeks from tonight. If later in the discussion we choose to do that focused work session on December the 4th on a Monday night at the library, we're working so that evening we can bring to you in draft form what objectives and specific action items we brainstormed, particularly under safety. And as we're doing that, you know, just like you, I've had many conversations with you guys, there's a lot of listening going on in the community. You can't go anywhere in the community and not have people want to talk about the tragic 10 days we had, 2 weeks, and particularly the age of people who are involved. So just today, as an example, under the objective of prevent crime, not crime reduction, but true prevention. I mean, just this afternoon after a community meeting, I added 6 more potential action items to it after talking with the school superintendent, after having conversations with other business leaders and community leaders. So I'm confident that on the 4th, I don't want to set the bar. You know, I want to be realistic. Your input, what ultimately, and you guys guide there, we're going to be able to provide a really good foundation of objectives and action items. How that builds on the 4th, what happens with that come first of the year when we swear in our couple of new council members and figure out what we're adopting in 2024. That's the work that we spent most of our time at our retreat doing. That would be very tangible to this conversation. Other things were how we work together and as a team, just like all of you, and there was some good time. I've had a number of directors tell me this is the 3rd time in 5 years we've gotten away for a night, that they felt this was the most productive. And I think we had the most both the tool that we use to get to know each other better and how we work together and how we complement each other and what our weaknesses was very effective. 2, we had a very specific goal to walk out of there with this further refinement of a strategic plan and a known timeline discussion with you guys in the future council. So thanks for the opportunity. Look forward to sharing it with you. And a lot of work will happen between now and December 4th when you see the draft.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, staff and department heads, for your work on that and participation in that retreat. Then we'll move on with public comment on any item on our agenda tonight or not on our agenda. Come forward and please come forward. And sir, if you could be sure to state your name and your address.
Thank you. Mike Yakowicz, Yakawich, 206 South 32nd Street, 59101. 406-647-6391.
Nicest guy
in the Capitol building. Well, I'm grateful to be here. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. I came here for a couple points, but first of all, you are awesome. You work hard. And why do I say that? Because in the last month, I've been in your office. I've been with you in Boise. I've been with you in different meetings throughout the community here. And if the community only knew how hard you worked. You were dedicated, you're public servants, and I've seen you from task forces to like a meeting we had on Friday with the Native Americans, just many meetings, and the community doesn't know how hard you work. I do. I've been in your shoes for 8 years, so thank you. And I thank Chief St. John also and the police. They are working hard, and he's always reassuring me of his due diligence and hard work. And Officer Hart, look in the back, you can't see him, but what a great example of our police force. So thank you for your hard work. Along with that, we had our roads paved recently, and I tell you, they're smooth as ice. Smooth as what? Smooth as Jell-O? I mean, you hired some great contractors for the South Side, so just well done. The Justice Center that I had an opportunity to be with, Councilmember Owens, well done, good job. Just a lot of things that I wanted to check off the list, Mayor. You gave a great talk at the Native American event last week, and you just encompass a lot. You're a great leader for our community. And so, with that, I'm not asking for any money from you or votes. Just it's a good to note all the things that are happening that I see in the neighborhood that, for me, those good things, thank you for them. I wanted to just put a plug for the Southside Pool. I know it will be on your CIP. Hey, I know you don't have the money maybe right now, but if you could just keep it on your CIP, I'd be grateful. As a citizen, Southside Mike, that's our swimming pool. Believe it or not, Councilmember Gulick, I've actually swam in that pool. And it's a wonderful pool, but however the vision is for the future, I just hope you could keep that. And also the rec center, it's an arduous path, and I know that it's still down the road, but I believe it'll be a great plus for our community. And I just hope that you can keep that on your radar screen. Circle back to thank you for your hard work, for your investment, your energy. And, if we as citizens can do anything for you, let us know. Thank you again, and have a great holiday.
Thank you, Representative, and we know none of us work as hard as you do, so thank you very much. Okay, any other public comment on either an item not on our agenda or on our agenda tonight? Each individual item will have an opportunity to comment later when we get to that item, so don't feel like you have to. Again, a copy of the agenda is back on the card.
So not on the agenda.
That's fine.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. I just wanted, let me give these to, thank you. No, I got one, thank you. Just wanted to talk with you a little bit about our unhoused neighbors in the community. As you may know, a group of us, myself, St. Vincent de Paul, and Salvation Army and Bethlehem Lutheran have put together a shower program that we've been doing since the end of March. We have provided, in that time, we have provided 420 showers to folks who are unhoused. They're screened at St. Vincent de Paul and taken to Bethlehem Lutheran via a Salvation Army van. In that process, we've gotten to know, and I have known folks just by being involved in the sheltering of unhoused neighbors this last 4 years. But in the process, we who have worked on this have gotten to know a lot of our unhoused neighbors. And we've gotten the privilege of hearing their stories. One of the reasons that we have gotten that is that setting of providing safe showers allows the time for us to interface. So I invite each of you and anyone in the community to volunteer for that as well. We usually do 2 volunteers, 2 to 3 a shift. And I invite you to do that because it's a really good way and a kind of a low-key way to meet your neighbors that you might not otherwise get a chance to talk to. And each of us that does this comes away energized and, I guess in some ways feeling really blessed. Out of that, though, we hear stories and we hear where people are, and a lot of them, in fact, most of the ones that we have showered who are clients of St. Vincent de Paul, as I say, in Salvation Army, most of them are not sheltering anywhere other than outdoors. MRM is our only shelter at the moment, and most of the folks that we've met do not shelter at MRM. Currently, they are sleeping wherever they can. It's getting cold, and we really need to provide shelter in a serious way in this community. And so I'm asking you, I'm asking you as the leaders to take it seriously this year now. Homelessness is not a housing problem, just a housing problem. It is first a shelter problem. Shelter has to come first. And we cannot let these folks die or get frostbitten. Cannot go. Morally and ethically, we cannot go this winter without some kind of supplemental shelter and working towards a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shelter for our unhoused population. We're buying a number of these emergency, what do you call it? Backpacks that allow people to be sheltered and protected. They're waterproof, and they also reflect the heat from people's bodies. So this is one of the ways that we're trying to help, but and showering, of course, but we really want you to do what you can, identify ways that we as a community can prevent these folks being outside this winter. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comment on items on the agenda or off? And again, we'll have an opportunity on the agenda items later.
Hi, my name is Dina Bishop, and I'm currently over at the 4th Avenue Inn. I'm here today to ask for an investigation into what happened on Wednesday or Thursday night over in between the police station and the church, the First Congregational Church. There was a fundraiser for homeless youth, and I met a gentleman named Robert who's homeless in this community and has been for some time. He's a very docile individual. He can barely get around. And I sat on the bench and had dinner with him the other night that sits in between this building and the church. And he told me that police came around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning and kicked him. And I've heard similar stories. So I see the cameras that are out there, and I'm asking that an investigation be done into what happened at this youth fundraiser. It was an overnight camp out. And it's really concerning to me that an individual such as Robert could be kicked by a police officer. So if an investigation could be done into that, if the cameras could be pulled, and we could get to the bottom of that. We're talking about homeless youth and homeless individuals that I know that there was, I was told that there was a fire out there and that also the fire department responded. But I'm kind of stumped as to why there was a use of force with the police involved. So if you could get to the bottom of that, nobody deserves to be kicked. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Councilor Perrington?
You know, with the chief being here, the council does not initiate any sort of investigation. I think the chief can explain that any complaints are filed through the police department. I think there's forms online, but the city council would not be part of that at this point because it would be more than secondhand.
And that's fine, we can pursue that, but I think the public deserves to know what's going on.
That probably would be a good way to initiate that. Thank you very much. Other public comment? Is there any other public comment? No one's coming forward, so we will close that and move on to our first regular agenda item, which is we have an update from our State Department of Labor and Industry. We had a request pretty recently, within the last week, and so Tammy is here with us, and we'll have an opportunity for questions after her presentation.
Thank you very much, Mayor Cole, and thank you, legislators, for having me here. My name is Tammy Hickey, and I am a project management specialist for the state, and I am tasked with going around talking about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the state plan that is needs to be resubmitted and written. Soon as my slideshow gets up. Okay. And thank you for allowing me to take just a few minutes of your time. I promise I won't be too long. Let me know when I'm ready. So really, I'm going to be brief. I'm going to give you an overview of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the state plan requirements, and then I have a few discussion questions. And it's all centered really around workforce development. We're almost ready.
Yeah, Councilmember Neese, can you see the PowerPoint? Okay.
Okay.
Now I can, thank you.
Yeah, okay, we're good. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. So basically, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, this was enacted in July of 2014. It replaced the Workforce Investment Act of 1988, previously known as WIA, and it is the primary federal workforce development legislation. The goal is to help job seekers access employment, education, training, and support services to succeed in the labor market. That's also purpose is to match businesses with the skilled workers that they need to compete in a global economy. The state plan requirements require states to develop a 4-year strategic vision that aligns resources and efforts and to produce quality results for businesses and workers. It also requires a coordination and alignment between the 6 core workforce development programs with a system-level approach, with shared goals, enhanced supportive services, and of course, through partnership expansion. The 6 programs are overseen by 3 entities. U.S. Department of Labor, so they oversee Title 1B and Title 3. This is the adult program, the dislocated worker program, the youth program, and then the Wagner-Peiser Act Employee Services Program. U.S. Department of Education, Office of Public Instruction, or OPI, oversees Title II adult education and literacy programs. And then the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, DPHHS, oversee Title IV vocational rehabilitation services. Of those 6 programs, again, it's those 3 entities that oversee those 6 WIOA programs. The state plan truly kind of guides the implementation for these programs and oversees the funding. We do have partner programs that also assist us in everything that is done in regards to workforce development. We've got the Carl Perkins, the Job Corps, Youth Build, Native American programs. There's a ton of programs that we also work with, but your 6 core programs are run under those 3 entities. So the WIOA vision is a public workforce system supporting the development of a
I apologize for interrupting you. I just got a text to Andy that it's not advancing, so.
Oh, no, that it's what? I'm sorry.
On Zoom, it's not advancing.
Oh,
We'll
Okay.
we'll work on that and do our best, but
Okay.
Tammy, why don't you go ahead and just do, as you speak, you might just keep that in mind and go into a little more detail on what the slide says, if that's convenient.
you got it. Okay, so basically the WIOA vision is a public workforce system supporting the development of a talent pipeline that has the skills, and expertise needed by businesses to thrive, which is what we all want in our Montana economies, correct? And it is centered around workforce development. So to do this, state and local partners are going to need to focus on the needs of the customer. They're going to need to align programs and partners. And there's got to be a requirement of accountability and continuous improvement. So for the sake of time, because workforce development is huge in every single community, even in the rural communities, my goal is to come back to Billings and host a larger stakeholder engagement with the economic development, the chambers, the service providers, everyone in the room talking about workforce development. For today, I'd like to just focus. My job is to get input, guidance, and advice, again, on how are the WIOA programs servicing the communities. And so I've got 3 questions up on the slides, and I'll just start with one to ask all of you. Where can the WIOA programs be more involved with statewide or local workforce development activities? And these are the WIOA programs when I talked about the 6 programs overseen by those 3 entities. So how can those programs be more involved in statewide or local workforce development activities? Next question was, how can the state ensure that various groups working on workforce are coordinated and not duplicative? So workforce development, like that's a buzzword. We're all doing it because it's that necessary. Unemployment is low, but how do we all work together? The third question is, what type of workers should we be targeting? And what would each look like? So do we target the unemployed? There's not many. Do we target the underemployed? What does that look like? Is that the youth? Is that the tribal communities? Is it those that are hardest to serve that have the most barriers? What does that look like? Or do we target the currently employed? You know, you've heard good workers are stolen by other companies because they want their, right? But that's not what should be done. Currently employed, is that growing your own? Is that for businesses to grow their own so that they can upskill and train and have that continuous evolving door of good skilled workers? What does that look like? I would love input from all of you or even anyone in the audience on any of those points.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Tammy. I do know you want some input, so I'll turn it over to the council. I'll try to get us started. At some point, maybe you could tell us to what extent you're coordinating with the Big Sky Economic Development, which is our trade port, and that's really the point of the spear when it comes to workforce development. So I'm sure we'd like to know a little bit more about that. But the third question that you had, what kind of workers should be targeted, you actually mentioned the ones that came to my mind, which is our youth and our native population. In both of those, there's even though we've got historically low rates of unemployment, we still have kids dropping out of school. And I prefer that they stay in school. And I'd like us all to cooperate on requiring compulsory education through 18 instead of 16, like many states do. So that's a side issue. But for those who drop out, they need hope and they need a job. They need structure and because now they're getting in trouble and they're causing serious crime problems. So that'd be my personal focus is whether vocational opportunities, something that interests kids early on in high school and gives them purpose and reason to stay in high school, and so they can get out and go to work at the refineries and make a couple $100,000 a year. So anything, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Tammy. Thanks for your presentation. And just through your 3 comments you made, where to go beyond, some of the places that you mentioned, the Career Center, the high schools, whatever tech schools there are. I think those are important. And then what was number 2? How do we work together? Is that what it was?
Yep, how do we work together
Okay, so,
to coordinate instead of duplicate?
okay, that I don't know. I don't know enough about that question because I don't know enough about what you do. But I'm going to echo what the mayor said, is that I would look at youth in tribal communities, but those youth at risk. Those are the ones that he was really referring to. And because I serve on the Board of Alternatives, I'm going to go with probation and parole. You know, those individuals, having interviewed several of those, they don't know where they're going afterwards. And many of them do not have job skills. And so they definitely need job skills. You know, whenever you talk about, our economic development program and everything, because these are government funds, I would like to see them to go to, really targeted to individuals and not to companies. Companies can do their own training, they can do their own hiring. But those individuals need to have the ability to be hired. So I think that's the key point, is who can be hired. So that's all I have to say, but thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Shaw, and Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a couple of thoughts. I would absolutely echo the focus on youth. It's one of a handful of clear prevention for youth violence is to have employment and to have the mentorship that comes along with it. Specifically, I work with a lot of kids in the foster care system. Job Corps is such a tremendous program, but it's often taken off the table for kids who are aging out of foster care because of the wait lists. So anything that we can do to expand that program, it is such a diamond in the rough, and I think if we can grow it, it really is to the benefit of the state. In addition to reentry, which I think is an important priority, I would also ask us to explore opportunities to increase the mental health workforce in the state. So specifically, one of the things that I think about is, as a lawyer, when I come out of law school, I could absolutely hang out a shingle and start practice, but I'm better off if I go to a law firm first, because I learn things, not just how to build a book of business, but how to bill, how to create forms, how to run a business. I think mental health workers face the same challenge. When they finish with their MSW, they could hang out a shingle, and many do, but it would be better for them to go into a large practice and learn the ropes. But we don't have many of those in the state of Montana. And so if there's a way we could create a little small business incubator or backbone for mental health workers, so as they're coming out of their master's program and looking for their 3,000 hours, it's clear who can mentor them, supervise their hours, but also who can help them with billing and practice and all that kind of stuff. We just have such a dearth, and if we could find ways to encourage those little practices to pop up, I think it would be better for us.
Great idea. Thank you.
When you talk about how to improve coordination, I don't know if DLI has like an ecosystem map on its website, but I might start there. Just mapping out all the players and the space they occupy. Where I've worked with people who do that, industries that do that, they tend to, collaboration follows from there. And then the last thing I would say in terms of maybe areas to focus on, I would look at enablers. I know you're talking about housing as a significant workforce enabler, affordable housing. Don't forget transportation and childcare. They're so
those are
critical.
huge.
They're critical even here in Billings. We only have about a third of the childcare spots we need in Billings for people to be able to work. And even with a good system like MetBus, people still struggle to get to and from work.
They do.
So those things that allow people to work when they want to, I think should not lose focus in the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great feedback.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. So I'll echo what a lot of the comments that have been said. One thing that hasn't been commented on that I think is an area of particular interest and importance for Billings is, how do we get our youth to come back here? We have a problem of, we export them, we send them all over the country and everywhere else, but how do we entice them to come back? And take some of these jobs, build their own business here, do all of that is just, I think, maybe Bozeman and Missoula aren't dealing with some of the same level of issues, but we certainly are here.
No, I think it's statewide.
Okay.
It is. And, and I don't know if it's a mindset shift. I'm not quite sure what the magic is to that either, but you're absolutely right. It is another point to look at.
Yeah, no magic solution, but an important one too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. Yeah, there's been a lot of good things said here. I'd agree with all of those. The only thing I would add to that is, when we look at, where kind of who to target is, we've had a lot of workers leave the workforce and not coming back, and I think we've lost a lot of valuable resource there, that maybe there's something we can do to try to reach out and bring some of that, those that have left to come back. Most of those are probably going to be older seniors. That's where we could get a lot of mentorship in some of the youth in that. So I think there's a lot of value there that, people left the workforce to somehow to bring them back. Maybe they won't come back full time, but they'll come back to kind of help the next generation. And I really want to stress, I really agree with your reentry, whether it's for veterans or corrections, people have been injured on the job, where they have to change their job, that kind of thing, or maybe, where industries are changing, where we need to kind of retool and stuff. So making sure that we're ahead of the curve on that. So, and we've had great medical school coming here to this area. So we've got a lot of different things coming to town. We need to make sure our workforce is ready for that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Gulick.
Yes, thank you. I work in the construction industry, and certainly there's a shortage of workers there, as we're well aware, and there's some good programs out there in high schools now, it does seem to me that probably across the board, but it's certainly true in the construction industry, even the baseline level of knowledge and know-how to get involved, to be hired really is higher than it has been in the past, right? I think it's true probably across the board in terms of what we expect in terms of just a minimal level of competency. I know that there are some job training programs out there. I wonder how well I don't know very much about them though, but I wonder how well they're taken advantage of. And so then I think if they're not used if the opportunity is not being used, then what does it take to bridge that gap from people not using them to using them? How can we really put some focus there and think of what are the whole range of social peer accountability, all kinds of tools that can bring them in.
Yeah. That's an important, I think that's one of the bridging that gap so that people know the services that are out there to help not only the individuals, right, to give them the training, the education, the things that they need to be good workers, but also to educate the business community and just the communities as a whole. And again, then bridging that gap and collaboratively working together. Because there are some underutilized programs that are just phenomenal. So,
Tammy, we'll just put on your radar screen that School District 2 here in Billings has a very innovative program that connects students with businesses in the trades to give them a little bit of a taste, a little bit of training, and it is a real plus for keeping them in school, but it's also a plus for getting them a very good paying job when they get out of high school. So you might want to look into that, and that, again, fits the collaboration piece very well. Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, hi. Looking through the plan, a couple of things really kind of jumped out at me. One of them is that in this section where we're talking about the various sources of federal funding, I think there were 10 of them. The state of Montana is only active in 3 of them. Can the city jump in some of those areas and fill some of those gaps? Is there a way for that to happen, or do we have to go through you?
well, so there's a lot of different funding streams and areas. The core funding programs for WIOA are overseen by those 3 entities. But those partner programs that we talked about, and then there's other funding streams that businesses, individuals can access as well. And so I think that is part of educating communities on all of that and how it works together is another piece.
So it can. Okay, great. One thing, this is more of a comment than anything else, but in the report, one thing you said is that the most common job skill required is active listening. And I just have to say that it's not just as a job skill. I mean, so much of the problems that we're dealing with right now, crime, violence, domestic violence, families falling apart, Is there a way to force feed people into listening to each other?
Gosh, I wish I had that, like that magical formula, right? That would be fantastic. But I do believe that education and training, I mean, education and giving people skills and the hope and the things that they need, the supportive services are huge. Because you can't just, it's not just one problem over here. It's a culmination, and figuring out how all of that works together, I know is definitely on the forefront of the governor's mind, the SWIB board, the commissioner.
I will admit it took me 20 years to learn how to do that, so, it's not easy. One of the things that I've noticed, and it came up, I think, in the conversation about caseworkers, it came up in a conversation for me with someone else with people working at the Department of Corrections and stuff like that. The requirements for training for people to get into these jobs are, it seems to me that it's a barrier. Not that I want these people to get these jobs without the training, but it seems to me that we need to find some way to incentivize, help them get through that process, make people realize that it's available and stuff like that. Is there anything like that on the radar?
No, that's a great point. That's absolutely a great point, and I know something that's being talked about as well.
Okay. And last topic, again about awareness. I think everybody out there who has one of those things knows that playing soccer is a job opportunity. But caseworkers, working for the Department of Corrections, heavy equipment operators, and on and on and on. Are you guys engaged in doing anything to try to help, especially youths, understand the breadth and complexity of the employment opportunities that are out there?
That's definitely also high on the list. And then when you think about that in the state of Montana and tackling that in each community, it's going to look, right, in your rural communities, that's going to look different than in Billings, Montana. However, you still have to do the awareness, the education, and you have to work with all of the players, all of the pieces, and you have to coordinate that, right? So what does that look like for the Billings community? And so that is something I look forward to, again, delving into a little bit deeper when I come back to do that community stakeholder engagement and as we continue these conversations on workforce development, because it is very important. Yeah. And we will have a survey that will go out that can have more concentrated questions so that we can kind of analyze that feedback too as we continue all of these conversations.
Okay, very good. Thank you much. Anything else before we let Tammy go? Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with a lot of what's been said, but we've kind of focused on the supply side of the workforce development, right? How do we prepare individuals to meet what companies want? But it's undeniable that over the last 50 plus years, companies' expectations have changed, right? It used to be that companies would hire for attitude and train for skills. But we're not seeing that as much as anymore. So I do disagree that the only focus here should be on individuals. We need to work as well on the demand side on companies and how do we get companies to take back some of that burden that they've shifted to the from private enterprise to the public sector, right? We're now talking about workforce development as a public sector problem, whereas really it should be a private enterprise-led mission. So I think we need to focus there. There are some companies that do this very well, right? And what do they do and how can we spread that knowledge to other companies as well? And so we can kind of take the public sector out of this a little bit and put some of that responsibility back on companies to develop and be loyal to and grow their own workforces.
Absolutely right. And when we, one of the slides that said focus on the customer, who's the customer? Well, the customers are the businesses, the industry. They should be driving this, but then the individuals that need the training to become those quality workers, they have to be intertwined. They just do. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Troy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I guess I haven't really got anything really interesting to say, but what I.
Well, we're listening
bothers me-
anyway.
But you have to listen to me. I guess that's the problem. You're going to have to listen to me.
No problem.
What really disappoints me is that when in our community, I see people working as DoorDash. I see people working as all of these jobs, and I look at that and I say, my goodness, how do you raise a family off of an income from doing DoorDash? Or there's just all over, and it's very convenient. People just pick up the phone, call, and the food just comes. But when I look at that as workforce development, I'm appalled. I'm appalled that members of our community are expected to live with an income that comes from being a DoorDash driver, an Uber driver. I mean, I'm appalled at that. So, in terms of workforce development, I don't know what my question is, but I would think that we would want to take people who are in jobs that are doing DoorDash and find them something better than that. And I think we as consumers should not expect food to arrive while the person who is doing that job is expected to live in our community with housing prices, food prices, fuel prices as they are. So I don't know where that fits in your scheme, but that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Not sure why you didn't add city council members on that list, but
Now, if I see a DoorDash come to with a snack for all of you, I'm
okay. Final item, or final comment, Councilmember Purinton?
There's the comment. I wanted to recognize Representative Carrie Seekins-Crow, one of our local legislators who's worked hard for a lot of our local issues. So she's also works for this department, and she represents this department. So,
and she's also on the SWIB board, so thank you for being here.
Very good. All right, thank you very much. I think that then concludes item number one, except we do need to have an opportunity for public comment. So thank you, Tammy.
Thank
if there's
you for your
anybody who
time.
would like to comment on this item, please come forward. No one is coming forward. No one is online. So we'll close off item number one and move on to item number two. This is our public safety update as requested. This work session, our next work session, will have further updates on our public safety situation. And turn it over to Chris. I know we had some information on the temporary misdemeanor holding facility recently, and also I believe the chief has some information for us. So to you.
And Mayor and Council, you've just summarized it. So I've got to ask the chief. He's got some more specifics he wants to talk about from the questions that came up last week and in the prior discussions. And then per our prep meeting this morning with yourself, Mayor, and Deputy Mayor, we talked about getting an update, and there has been quite a bit of conversation and dialogue, both private, public, and behind-the-scenes work between the city and the county relative to both our proposal concept as well as long-term issue with the jail. So both of those are what I figured we'd have asked the chief to hit it first, and I know that both Deputy Mayor Boyette and Councilmember Owen, I think you're going to provide us an update on the great work that they're doing between us and the county. So, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Mayor, Council, good evening. First of all, updates on the 4 investigations that we have going on. No new information to speak of. I will remind you that we do have 2 juveniles in custody for the stall cop shooting. They are going to be charged as an adult, or so indicated by County Attorney Twido. We do have 2 in custody for the shooting on North 17th. However, those are unrelated charges, but those 2 individuals who are main suspect are in jail and not likely to go anywhere. So we're waiting for charges there. We do not have any charges or arrests on the South 29th situation. Investigation continues there. However, we have identified, located all pertinent parties on that one. The shooting that was on Monad was not related to anything of our discussions, a domestic situation. It was kind of a standalone there. No arrests there again. Everybody identified, working to get some closure on that case. And then you saw on the 18th that we had a shooting out on the West End. There were 3 people involved in there. There was an argument, a struggle, and an individual was shot inside that car. He was not cooperative, and neighborhood video shows a little bit different story than what was reported with that. So that was the incident of the week. So nothing catastrophic, but we're still working on those issues. I had some time to think about the questions that council posed to me. On my way home, I can think of 1,000 different things I could have told you at the time, but didn't. So I'm going to try to hit some of those as I remember them. To Councilmember Rowan, questions were, have we asked the state for help? The answer to there is yes. As I indicated, we do have task force agents on different task force sides that are helping us out with that. But we specifically reached out to probation and parole to help us with some sweeps and dedicating personnel to help us with our investigation and tracking people down. Secondly, we have really enlisted the help of the state lab. The thing that we deal with is that the lab that is responsible for ballistics is in Missoula. The lab that we have here does the drugs. And so when we need something under a critical timeline, we hand deliver it to Missoula. And I will say they were outstanding, working late in the night to get us some forensics on one particular case, which we were able to put together and present to the county attorney's office on that one. So continuing to work on that. Councilmember Owen also asked what it is we needed. I would say we need positive messaging from the council and then the community as well. I indicated before, these are targeted situations. Billings itself is safe across the board. I think our numbers show that. We certainly would appreciate and continue to appreciate the support of the police department and the efforts we continue to hear from the vocal minority. You know, this is all our fault. We don't do anything. And you guys are included in that as well, by the way, if you didn't know that. We will share that. Certainly need your help mobilizing the community as we talk about the prevention side of things. That is a community issue, and we really need your support to be galvanized as one, and then help us mobilize to send that message that this is not acceptable in this community. We appreciate that. Obviously, funding will always be here with our handout. I think you know that there are very few problems that we can't solve if you throw enough money at it. And this is no different, or any policing. So certainly anything to support that. I would tell you one piece of technology, which is called Shot Spotter. We're researching it through the federal side of things. Essentially, it's a series of microphones that are strategically located around the city. And if something goes bang, it can triangulate and immediately get a police dispatch with that. It's in use in the bigger cities, so it expedites response, gets us in areas or whatnot. I would say that we may have a challenge with that. There are some voices at the legislature who really are opposed to anything technology-wise, either looking at or listening to the citizens. I think before the session started, we had meetings with them. Again, the citizens were pretty upset about some of the traffic stuff going on. We tried to revisit traffic cameras, and the response was hell no. And so you have something, I don't know where that would fall in this, but again, it's technology. You know, the accusation with the traffic cameras is that I could turn it and look into one's bathroom. And I don't know if it'd be the same thing that I could hone into your conversation in your kitchen, but none of that is accurate. But that's a technology that not only would help this situation, but but get us, across the board anytime we have this action. Councilmember Neese had a couple questions. Talked about curfew. We have been working with the city attorney's office. There is a city ordinance on the curfew. There is some problematic language in there that we need to revisit. We also are looking at, we have a tactical plan to do some curfew and not end up putting us in a babysitting situation. And then I'll explain a little bit of how that's going to look. So we are doing that. We also are researching holding parents accountable. There are some laws on the books there that they need to make sure that their kids are going to school, things of that sort. So again, those are things that we're looking at. Also, council member, you were questioning what does redouble mean. I've mentioned that a couple times. So essentially, we'll forego using that. But essentially, we have reallocated and retasked a lot of our resources and a lot of our personnel to this specific problem, and we've had some good results. To which I again rebut the argument that we got caught by surprise. We haven't been doing anything, because that's not the case at all. Now that we have these really acute situations, we are again dedicating more resources, more time, more personnel to address this situation, and it's certainly warranted on that. Several of you were questioning stolen gun situation. A lot of, or I shouldn't say a lot, but some discussion about charging the owner. That is not a good idea. I won't recommend that. Somebody can do everything right, securing their weapons, and still get something stolen. What you will hear, depending what radio station you listen to, I'll warn you now, if you want to stay away from that, the sheriff and I have done some PSAs essentially addressing responsible gun ownership, which basically says when the gun's not in use, let's get it secured up and lock it up. So we have the PSAs taking place there. Mayor, your rhetorical question is what's with the hockey stick? That was a very poor effort to reflect an 11% decrease in violent crime from 2020, I believe it was, to current. So that's what that line reflected, and rather poorly, I would say. Again, aside from the probation parole resources that we're leveraging, State Lab in Missoula and Billings are helping us out. The Attorney General is coming to town next week to roundtable some of these issues with all of our partners. And we are working with our federal partners. Obviously, they have an enforcement side, but they are able to leverage some additional grant monies. We are expecting some OSADEF, which is Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force overtime money. And what we will do there is put additional people on to help us do our high visibility enforcement, hotspot policing. Homeland Security is creating a task force officer, which again frees up money and resources, and providing an analyst to support the BPD analyst. With that, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms technology, we use their national ballistic system, and then there's a tracking systems coming in. We'll be meeting to get trained up on drawing the lines on where this gun's been and who touched it. All of these things are going to help us across the board. We certainly we have lots of training lined out. We are also collaborating with gang task forces in our region, the big cities. So we're making sure that we are doing taking contemporary actions. What are they seeing? What's best practices in the bigger cities? So we're reaching out to do that, and so far we are on that. Last, I was asked to touch specifically on the juvenile side of this story, not so much the adult stuff. So what we're seeing, and this is coming from task force members, is that the age range of the juveniles that we are dealing with is 12 to 17. As you recall, we have about 60 of them identified. The task force indicates we have 85 to 90% of them identified. We know who they are and where they're at. So that's very, very good work. The juvenile side regarding territorialism is really not an issue, which I found quite interesting. It is nothing for one individual to go across town to hang out with another gang, if you will, even though they live in an area of another one. It's not so much neighborhood oriented, it's city issue, and they move around. A lot of the things we see is that they need to bum rides. Somebody's got a car. Okay, can you take your mom's car? So you get them picked up and driven, bicycles and walking, things of that sort. Interesting dynamic there. They are represented in all our schools. We know they are there, and we also have a fair number that have been expelled, and they are relegated to home learning. I'm not sure if they're following through with that, or if there's anybody to monitor. But you have them present in the schools and out doing their thing, which of course has us in cooperation and involvement with our school resource officers to identify, bring additional resources there. We are looking to bring some narcotic sweeps in there. There's a little bit more leverage and things you can do differently in the schools than you can elsewhere. We've brought dogs in before and do the lockers and all that. So again, increased presence, see what it is that we can do. Councilmember Neese was asking about Lake Elmo. Our night shift officers have been swinging through there. What we have discovered is that the areas they're hanging out pretty much, again, across town are the large parking lots. So anywhere you're seeing the big tire marks where they're spinning out and all that, you've got that presence. And so targeting the curfew sweeps, again, logistically get that worked out. But we know where they're hanging out, in these large parking lots all over town. Then I will finish up with working very hard with the county attorney's office to make sure that, they are on board with the gang enhancement charge if it's determined appropriate. And then again, we got to educate our judges on that. And so we're working hard with that. And we have liaison with Tumbleweed, which is a great resource. So we're getting a lot of information, a lot of cooperation, ability to intervene on some things down there. That is my report, short of the hour last time. We do have short-term, long-term plans we're working on, and Mayor, I'll cede to you for questions.
Wow, Chief, that's a lot, and much appreciated. Thank you very, very much, and thank you for everybody in your department and your partners who are working on that. So I think that's exactly what we were hoping to look for, so kudos. I'll just comment, I'll throw it to the rest of the council on the issue of the shot spotter, and you probably already know this. Our own Alan Overcast is very knowledgeable about that technology, Anne Marie's father, so reach out to him if you haven't already, or I'll give you his contact if you don't have.
Thank you.
We'll start down here, kind of work this direction. Anything? Okay. Councilmember Neese, do you have anything?
Yes. First of all, Chief, again, thank you for bringing the report back. Just a quick question on the ordinance changes you're talking about, the legal side. When can the council expect to see those changes?
I will have to coordinate with Gina. She had it pulled up and ran through a couple things. I don't think it's too labor intensive, a couple lines to bring it up to date and make it workable for us. I will touch base with her tomorrow, see what a timeline is.
Okay, thank you. And then I was notified by, and maybe that you already know this, but that the High Sierra Dog Park, I guess there's, one of the residents said there's some people hanging around there at dark at night. There's no lights there, so I don't know if you guys are patrolling that area or not, but that's one area they mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask the night shift to spend some time up there.
Okay, and then I did ask you some information about the numbers of the guns being confiscated versus how many stolen, and you weren't quite sure the exact number. Would you mind taking a little more look into those numbers and getting back to us on that?
Certainly, thank you.
And mainly, I'm looking for, of these guns confiscated, I think you gave us 22 numbers estimates. And then how many were stolen from Billings, and then of those, how many are actually used and committed in crimes in Billings?
I will work on those numbers, and I think Lieutenant Cart's back here pretending I can't see him. He'll help me track some of those down.
I appreciate that. And I look forward to hearing your PSAs on securing guns. I do think that's important, but you're right. I would be supportive of the ownership being fined, because you can lock it up all day long and they'll break in and get them.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Owen, anything?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, thanks for getting back to us on all those things. I would still obviously encourage you, when you have that meeting or whatever, to ask for specific resources from the AG's office as well. But I wanted to talk about this idea of positive messaging, because I think it's really an important one. You've listed out just a whole lot of things that are going on right now, but as you've noted, there's this need for community support on prevention. And I think there's going to be some great conversations about how we mobilize the community sort of industries or organizations or entities, but I think at the end of the day, there's still individuals who are looking for things to do besides just locking up their guns. So, I mean, there's certainly things I would recommend. This is a great time to volunteer. This is a great time to, find a way to be in schools or help at-risk youth. But specifically, what would you give to the citizen who's sitting at home saying, I want to do something, that my positive message comes from feeling like I'm a part of the solution? What would you tell them to do?
Certainly, thank you. I would say that there are programs that are in place that one can volunteer for, or even, get hired on, that work with kids and programs. Specifically, you've heard me mention Boys and Girls Club. They probably, have things ready to go and they don't even know it, which is exactly what it is we're needing. I'm sure the YMCA has some programs, things like that if you really want to help in that respect, lend your expertise and time to programs that will encourage kids out of the gang lifestyle and into something more productive. I think coaching athletics, for example, there are, tons and tons and tons of youth activities, that need coaches. And so those are things that I would encourage. Again, we have a volunteer program, and there's lots to do there, not necessarily helping with kids and programs, but certainly supporting the police department function in our crime prevention efforts across the board. I just got a report from their November meeting, which I need to look at and can forward to you. Outstanding work being done by a group of individuals who just want to have somebody say thank you. Thank you. And they do a wonderful job for the city, force multiplier for the department. So those are things that I would say that they're available.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to have to keep apologizing tonight. My brain is just like flitting around with little tiny thoughts that aren't coming together really clearly, but I'll give it a stab. Do you see the age of gang members being between 12 and 17? 12 is quite young.
Yes.
Do you see this as problematic or an opportunity? Thank you.
Well, I see it as both. Problematic in the fact that you have individuals that are flirting with that lifestyle. And we know that the elders who are really guiding and directing the behavior are looking for kids that are that young because they're impressionable. If they have a broken home and they're not being accepted, all that type of stuff, it's a perfect recruiting ground for that. On the criminal side of things, they're going to have them go out and do the crimes because they're not going to go to jail. The adults are insulated and the youths are going to get what they get because they're juveniles. And it's not just here, it's nationwide. So yes, that's a problem. It's also an opportunity because of all those reasons. They're impressionable, they're looking for something solid, and we, the community, can offer that. But we got to get to them with that.
Just a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up, I think that the Big Brothers Big Sister program is a really great opportunity to people get involved. And I can tell you, at every elementary school, there's a PTA, and they need people. Please join your PTA. You can organize your neighborhood into an neighborhood watch. There are lots of opportunities out there, and I think that we can do positive messaging about those opportunities that could find people an avenue to help kids at risk. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joy. I'll just second, we did get a specific appeal from Big Brothers Big Sister. They're in desperate need for volunteers and dollars now, so if anybody's listening, reach out to them and help where you can. I'd also put in a pitch for your creating a neighborhood watch. Keeping track of your immediate neighborhood is really an excellent approach. Looking for anything that's out of the way or unusual, making sure that people know how to contact the police if they see something, comparing notes. Around Rose Park, they're doing some very successful work there. I think her name is Marty Hine. If anybody wants me to put you in touch with her, she can give you some tips. I spoke with her the other day. And so there's a lot that you can do on a neighborhood basis if you're interested. So moving on down this way, Councilmembers Shrieky, Tidswell, Purington, Councilmember Shrieky? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, Chief. I do know that there are, so on the technology issue, I do know that the language that the legislature has currently left us with allows localities to use technology to cameras and stuff like that to track criminals and just about everything else, unless you're the type of criminal that is speeding or running a red light. So that seems to be like a singular exception to that. That said, I recently became aware of two specific different technologies, and I'll shoot you an email about them. But basically what they're doing is creating a software layer, collecting the shot data, business cameras, doorbell cameras, any kind of digital electronic piece of information that can be used in order to pull the evidence together, in a situation like that. And both of those providers did emphasize that it was much more about collating evidence than anything else. This is like a question, I'm not exactly sure where to take it, but one of the possibilities one of the things that I know that other cities have done in focusing at those children who are most at risk at doing these things is also to go to their homes and talk to the parents and see if the parents will help them collect the guns and take the guns away. I see you nodding, so this is something you guys are aware of and are thinking about.
Yes, we are aware of that. That goes to the intervention side of things, building that rapport, not only with the kids, with the parents as well.
Yeah, okay. Last comment. So I think, and I will make sure that we have a fuller conversation about this when council just starts talking about it. But I think it's one thing to say that we need to be doing positive messaging, trying to convince people to do this. It's a whole nother thing to actually organize the effort, get the word out that Big Brothers and Sisters needs help, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's a very important role that the city should be playing at this time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tiswell.
Chief, you said 80 to 90% identified these 12 to 17-year-olds.
That's correct.
Are we increasing interactions with parents and guardians?
Yes, we are.
And you've talked about holding them responsible for their kids' actions. How deep are we into that?
Again, the thing that we're looking at right now, it is a municipal, and it's a city ordinance, so not a lot of teeth in it, if you will. And so, we're working through that. But again, we want to educate and get people to voluntarily comply and not necessarily hammer everybody. There are some parents who are totally checked out. A lot of my conversations anymore, I'm not going to talk about, the broken family. There's no parents there. What I'm looking for is a authority, somebody who, will run herd on these kids, be responsible. It doesn't necessarily need to be mom and dad, because we know you have foster kids. We have a brother or sister, grandma, grandpa, friend. It doesn't matter what it is. Responsible authority figure that can help us with this. If we get to a position that we need to hold the parents accountable because they're just saying, not my problem, then we can do that. What the best mechanism is and where it's going to end up, those are things that we need to really drill down on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Purchin.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief. It's
ma'am.
good to have you back in town. So we had a group this past week of just concerned citizens, and there were 115 people there, which amazed me. We had a panel of law enforcement, starting with Billings PD, Sergeant Stovall, working our way up to incarceration, so judges were there as well. We had some state legislators in the room as well. And what it boiled down to are people do want to help. I mean, there's, someone, well, what do you want? What can we do? And so it's kind of hard, I guess, on the flash to try to come up with a few things. And some of these are excellent ideas. But the one thing that happened, and you said it at the very beginning, is that people need to be informed. And I think that's the biggest thing that we came away with that. It was not a solution-driven panel, and some, critiqued it that way in that, well, we didn't come up with anything. We go, no, but you learned something, and they did. So they realized how hard the Billings PD is, how hard the prosecution is working, just all the way up and down the line, how hard everyone is working, and they all have their own challenges. But the biggest thing was, for me, was that we need to stop the finger pointing. I don't care, we're always saying, you talk to someone, well, it's the jail. Well, then the jail's going to finger point to someone else. So it's a matter of coming up with solutions. And just talking with the AG, I think that's great. They've got ideas, we've got ideas. Everyone has ideas, but to get in a room and come up with some solid solutions, I mean, we'll make a bucket load of money if we come up with some, just because it's happened nationwide. It's not just here in Billings. So I appreciate your comments, and, just keep, anytime people have an opportunity to get someone that is in the know, I don't care if it's a police department, I don't care if it's in the prosecution or in the judicial side, get someone there that knows what is truly going on. Because I've heard from several individuals, and they tell me a whole string of things, and I'm going, 3/4 of what you told me is not true. And I think that's where all the misinformation gets out there, the hard feelings, the bad feelings. So I would say let's start working together, be, focused on positive outcomes. And I think that's what your force is doing, and I just can't commend you enough on what these officers have been doing and dealing with. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Council Member. We are well aware that we have a key role in the messaging. We have over 20 specific businesses that want to host Coffee with a Cop. I don't get over 20 that want to do chat with the chief, but I'm going to crash your party. But they want to host that, and so we will be out in the next few months doing those.
Good.
And it's a great or a great opportunity to interact and answer those questions. We are scheduling a chat with the chief somewhere, probably toward the first of the year, and try to get that going. But the Coffee with a Cop is far more popular than listening to me drone on. The other thing, and Chris may refer to that, but we're going to be working with Victoria and Gavin, who have been tasked to do just what you said, is to get the positive messaging out there, not only just about what's going on in the police department, but citywide. There's so much good stuff going on. It's just incredible. But everybody focuses on the bad. And so we're really working on that messaging to be proactive on, the good stuff. The bad stuff's there, we're going to deal with it, but look at all the good things that are going on as well. So that's what's underway right now. They'll be on a lot of the law enforcement stuff. They'll be coordinating with RPIO and vice versa. So your point is well taken, and we're on it.
So just to follow up with that, Chief, yeah, there are great things going on, positive things going on, but there are definite challenges. And I think that needs to be a part of the conversation, because we do not want to paint a rainbow and unicorn picture, because it's not that. We want factual messaging going out, but we also need to know, we're just not sitting back on our duffs, not doing anything. So I think an honest approach to what is going on. I know there's a lot of stuff you can't share, and I can appreciate that. But I would just, if there's certain challenges, we need to address those head on, and then where do we go to find solutions for them?
Very good. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, you only have so many people. If you move a bunch of people from Project A to Project B to help, what's not going to get done?
Project A is not getting done.
No, but I realize you're going to double down on some things, but at the same time, something else isn't going to get done.
Yeah, certainly. And I would say that right now, because we have fully devoted the street crimes unit to this problem, and we added one officer, the content expert, you've talked to Officer Bisline, from patrol to specifically address this. This is what they are doing right now. The street crimes that they were working on before, that's really not getting a lot of attention. And I'm afraid that, we're going to start seeing stolen vehicles, the burglaries, the thefts, those type of things, those numbers start creeping up a little bit. Because again, we have finite resources, and, prior to this, we were doing a little bit in both areas. And now it is full court press on this to get a handle on it and get this thing taken care of. So, yes, and that's that question again. I asked you, what do you not want us to do? So right now, the street crimes things are not getting as much attention as they did before. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor.
We'll go to public comment.
Chief, I'll probably echo Council Members Joy's comments here and say I don't really have anything terribly interesting to say. But I do want to caution you about this controversial suggestion that getting youth involved in positive activities like sports and other things, that might be just as controversial as what you're asking people to do about being responsible with their firearms. So be careful about that. We'll have to see how many of those barbs come back at you about those two things. It'll be interesting. I have to say I love the focus on prevention. And getting ahead of this so that the men and women on your team are put in fewer dangerous situations in the future, right? We've had a lot of talk about the nurse-family partnership and how that's focused on new families from the time that from birth essentially to or prenatal to 2 years old or so. But you're talking about youth that are 12 to 17. So at some point in between 2 and 12, they start disengaging from society, like disengaging from positive activities, and whether that's because of things that are going on in the home or negative influences in the neighborhood and their friends or whatever, there's this point where kids start dropping out, from a positive path. And we almost need a nurse-family partnership for that age range, that 8 to 12. Like, how do we get them in there? And you mentioned Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Somebody mentioned Boys and Girls Club and CLDI and Friendship House and all these things. They're all great. We need to be able to have something that, and this is probably more for Chris than Chief, because you're not going to do this, but some type of program that identifies these situations and puts that nurse back in the home or whoever that is, that social worker, and starts directing resources at those families so that they can intervene so that they don't become your problem in a gang a little bit later. I don't know what that is. I know everybody is trying to do it, and like somebody said, if we, Pam, I think said this, if we can figure this out, we'll make $1 billion because everybody's dealing with this. But that type of intervention, and the school district is doing it with a re-engage program, right? Kids are dropping out. 90 kids have dropped out this year already from school, and they're trying to get them re-engaged back into a HiSET program or back into school. And so, but we need to back up a little earlier than that. And so to me, this just emphasizes the need to not just focus our prevention on the earliest years, but all through early, preschool, elementary school, up through the 12 to 15, 17. And it's really not too late by the time they turn 18, right? We shouldn't stop investing resources in challenging, or in kids that have had challenging lives by the time they're 18, right? We need to focus on them too and show them that there's a better path. But so Chief, I trust you'll just take that and get that done. So thanks.
Chris, you want to comment on that?
Well, Councilmember Roop says, was it you that suggested I look at the Art of Being there? Was that?
I think I suggested, right.
So it plays off of a comment that I didn't hear, which is as people are asking, what can I do? What can I do? And I'd be the first example of, I'd love to be a coach, but I don't know the first thing about it. It's mentoring. I mean, there's a bunch of research out there that just mentoring. And I say just in that before I had a family, I did a little guy. And you don't have to, it's not that you got to go through a year's worth of training. It is as a responsible adult being there for a kid and building a relationship. And this particular program I'm learning about apparently has got some phenomenal results. And that is, what can people do? What can citizens do? Literally volunteer to mentor and track with that child. The United Way has a program. I think it's a pretty small scale as far as the amount of time from some of these programs that are really literally turn into full-time jobs. But mentoring kids appears to be one of those evidence-based, proven, like nurse-family partnership, to have extraordinary outcomes if we can do that. So.
Very good. Thank you. We'll open up for public comment, but again, thank you, Coach St. John, since you've done that for many, many years and impacted many kids and made a real difference. So thank you. That's been your
Thank you,
your
Mayor.
career,
Two things, if I may close. First of all, I had an offline conversation with Councilmember Rowan. I want to make sure any of our press releases, I'm not sure if you've been getting them, maybe hit and miss. We thought that they were going all council, but I made it. We're making sure that anything that goes to the media and whatever shows up on social media is the same. So anything that we send to the media, you should be getting in your council email. If it wasn't, sorry, thought it was, but that was it. And then second, thank you, Mayor, for your kind gesture to the officers last week. They appreciate. Mayor sent some goodies to the troops. Didn't last very long, I might say, but thank you for your thought. Very, very kind of you. So.
Thank you again. So this is an opportunity for public comment on the update that you've heard on public safety. If anybody would like to be heard, please come to the podium. You know the routine probably at this point. 3 minutes and just ask for your name.
Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. Mayor, Council, and Chief. I think you probably all remember the process of me coming to you years ago talking about adult gangs. And the process of what I felt was persevering through some pretty negative responses on your part to what I had to say about the presence of adult motorcycle gangs in the community. Dismissal, denial, anger that I identified people that you know and the community knows that have contact with the gangs. I think the first thing that you, from that experience and from my 3 years of following deeply the 2 gangs, motorcycle gangs that I had contact with, I think that you need, and the community as a whole, all of us need to be educated on what a gang looks like, why people join gangs versus, a nice organization, a baseball team or something like that. These folks from the adult gangs are there because of trauma. They're there because of the strong need for camaraderie. And they're there because of a deep, deep anger at one thing or another. And they've been in situations where that's acceptable behavior from the time they were maybe in the military or maybe as a child. Somewhere they got the idea and that it's okay to bully because they were bullied. It's okay to, to be angry because they've seen some horrific things in their lives. And so the gang versus the regular motorcycle groups, the gang becomes something that is satisfying for certain people that have, at least from my observation, a lot of trauma in their lives. I think the community, when I start talking about it, and still happens, people really react. And if I name names, that's really terrible. But I think there needs to be an honest discussion and, again, real effort to communicate and educate the public on why people do join gangs, why kids would join a gang versus a baseball team or a soccer team or a mentoring situation. That trauma has something to do with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item number 2? I don't see anyone online. No one's coming to the podium, so we will close public comment period, and that finishes item number 2. Chris, go ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to get for sure was a determination
I apologize. We didn't
on
get an update.
our schedule.
No, and temporary.
So we had the jail, but the piece I want to make sure we get at some point is we do have the library on hold for the Monday, the normal council time, Monday, December 4th, which is our normal rotation for work sessions, with safety being the item on the agenda. We also, though, had held off December 7th, that's a Thursday, because there was some indication that the preference was possibly to stay away from a Monday and have this in addition to. So I just want to clarify that tonight. Do we want to do Monday night, Thursday night, though in further conversations with some of you, part of the conversation was, would we get more attendance during a day meeting? So I made an assumption about evening, but bottom line point is we need to nail down when, so that we can get it advertised, reserved, and make sure, lastly, if you have people you want me to invite, in addition to staff conversation, I can do that, you can do that. But I just want to make sure it's the productive time you're looking for. I know we've got the environment to do it and the setting to do it at a table together versus at the dais kind of thing, but want to make sure I've got the right people there and the right time for you.
Okay, Chris, and before I open it up, Council, to discuss that December 4th or 7th, Monday or Thursday issue, I forgot, we did want to give at least a brief update on the letter that Chris sent to the county commissioners proposing, reaffirming our set aside of $500,000 in the budget to investigate a temporary pre-arrangement misdemeanor holding facility. And the council or the county commissioners did briefly address that positively at the end of the week. So, but council members Owen and Boyette, that's been kind of your bailiwick. So if either of you would like to give us an update on that, I was at that meeting and I can do that as well, but I want to turn it to you too.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I think we're making progress. I think not only was it discussed last week by the commissioners, but again today. We discussed, so the jail study group, that is the subcommittee of the CJCC, meets now every Monday, and we discussed it at length in that group today. Got a, I think, unanimous, or at least near unanimous vote of support for that, for the project out of that group. There is sort of stakeholders across the criminal justice system, so it was really gratifying to have that. And then the commissioners discussed it again at their discussion meeting today. There are some physical plant challenges at YCDF that I think everyone is pretty aware of, and so I think the commission is intent on engaging an architect to figure out precisely where a temporary facility like this could go behind the fence at YCDF, and what sort of what footprint would be available, essentially, where it is easiest to get to water and sewer hookups, where there aren't sort of swampy lands or bogs or that sort of thing. So I think that represents meaningful progress. There's probably some RFPs that will need to be drafted. I think Gina has recommended an interlocal. There does not seem to be a lot of concern that an interlocal will be hard to get drafted, which I think is great. So, you know, again, I just, not obviously for council, but I think for the public, want everyone to understand that this is not a jail expansion. This is designed to solve a very narrow problem that the city uniquely faces, which is our officers are encountering people multiple times in an evening, and people with multiple outstanding warrants, and there is no room at the inn. And so they're being left in the community and generating failures to appear. Plus, in often continuing to commit crimes in a very short period of time. So what we've proposed is a very short-term facility for pre-arraignment only, with the assumption that many of these people would be released on pretrial monitoring. So they would get their initial appearance in front of a judge, the conditions of release would be established, and they would not be remand, unless, of course, there happened to be felony warrants or other outstanding things, at which case the remand would go to the YCDF main facility in the same way it would today. So this is not a jail expansion. This is designed to break down the backlog. And I say that because in the context of the larger conversation of a jail expansion at YCDF, I think what is happening at this stakeholder group is really important. That the first question is, how fast can we move cases in Yellowstone County? Because very few people, with the exception of BMC and a few justice court, people are not generally serving sentences at YCDF. They are waiting trial. So the overall efficacy of the criminal justice system, how fast people get in the door, how quickly they get to trial, how quickly they are moved to DOC or anywhere else, makes a difference in how many jail beds we need. So the first question is, how can we break the backlog in the system? And the pre-arraignment facility is part of that conversation. And then the next question is that more precise study around how many beds and what kind of beds, minimum security, maximum security, detox, what do we need at YCDF for the growth? I think the conversations are very productive. They're very collaborative. Good issues are being raised. There was a very robust discussion about a very targeted arraignment court that's designed to bring all of the courts together and begin solving problems, because often we hear about people who are sitting at YCDF waiting to be transported to DOC. And we on council get frustrated and we tell the sheriff, drive them up there and chain them to the fence, get them out of here. But often they're sitting on resolution of a misdemeanor case or a probation violation. So getting everyone together and talking together is really important as a precursor before a jail expansion, so we know exactly how much expansion we need versus system inefficiency that we can solve now. So all of that is a long way of saying that I believe our city proposal of a pre-arraignment facilities moving forward productively, and it is in the context of very serious and much larger conversations about criminal justice reform in the community and a jail expansion.
Thank you. That's a great explanation, Councilmember Rowan. I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Boyett, but on the way, I'm just going to correct something that was in the newspaper. At the commissioners' meeting, I was quoted as indicating that the jail is set for 434 and now has about 500. That would only be about a little over 60, which they could handle quite easily. I think what I actually said was typically it's in the high 500s. Closer to that 600 number. So in percentage terms, it's a huge overage, and that's why we have the problem that we do.
I think the number today is 594 was what was reported.
594,
so very, very high.
Yeah.
And I would also say, Mayor, the only thing before Councilmember Boyett that I forgot to mention is everyone is aware that any of these solutions, including this facility, rely on some workforce solutions. We know that to be the case, so I don't want anyone to think that we're unaware of the fact that we have workforce issues. Thank you.
Sure. Councilmember Boyette.
Very simple, the meeting for the county commissioners Thursday, the sheriff said he liked our letter and he supported it. And he wanted to move forward with an architect to find out who, what, where, and when, why. And the commissioners came back and said they agreed and they would engage an architect. So compared to a year ago, I think we've gone 180 degrees. I think this is the most important thing, is to get the county agreeing with us that there is an issue and hoping to solve the problem with us. So we want to work together.
Very good, Councilmember Parrington, and then Council will try to come back to the Monday or Thursday issue. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm good with Monday. So just the question on the 500,000. How far will that go? What, do you know what that would pay for? That would be to Councilmember.
I think the quick
Owen.
answer is no, but I'm going to let Councilmembers Owen and nobody knows for sure the details, but you've got some numbers. Go ahead, Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. The challenge is really that, I mean, the city is sitting in a position of funding, and it will be up to the sheriff and the county to select their vendor. And so without knowing the vendor, it's hard to answer that question. I think there's some markers, though, that we can use for conversational purposes. In some one-on-one conversations, the sheriff has indicated that a facility like this would cost less than $1 million a year, which is why we did 500,000 in the budget, because we figured it would take half a year to sort it out and then half a year for the rest of it. But again, it depends on vendors, it depends on the scope, the services, all those sort of things. The other thing I would say that if we, the city, say we want 20 beds, for example, at the current sort of estimated rate of $100 a day, that's somewhere in the low 700,000s. If it were the sort of Fed rate of 125, that's somewhere in the 900,000. So it's in that vicinity that I think we're looking at for an annual cost, I think. But again, there's got to be negotiations, there's got to be RFPs, so I don't want to be too specific. But the reason we did 500,000 is because it's hopefully about half a year.
So just to follow up to that, with that amount of money going towards this, because that's going to include architectural designs and some of these other things, I guess one of my concerns is who we put in there. It's just city misdemeanors that need to appear before the judge. But what about, because this is a holdup in the county jail, our mental health assessments? We won't have those.
So a couple of things to sort out there. First of all, there shouldn't be a lot of architectural design work because the idea is temporary prefabricated, whether it's prefab cells or, anything. So we shouldn't be doing a construction proposal here. At least I don't think that's consistent with what council voted on. Secondly, the issue with mental health is not mental health treatment, it's competency evaluations.
Right.
So the Behavioral Health Commission that Representative Yakowicz sits on has already begun prioritizing funding for pilot strategies to address competency evaluations. I believe there are conversations going on between sort of health partners in the community about how we get those evaluations done locally more quickly. So the competency to stand trial is a separate and apart question. I think that is being solved, or is at least being addressed in the Billings community.
So, and just finally, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I've heard one criticism of this plan, and it was, well, they're going to go back out on the streets. They will go back out on the streets, but hopefully it's with monitoring.
Yes.
But I guess that was the main crux of that criticism.
So they're on the streets now, right? But what hopefully we'll do first is interrupt the cycle. So if people are escalating throughout the course of an evening, we interrupt that and we reduce the number of crimes. Secondly, we create a very valuable point for diversion, which I think is essential, that we be able to divert people who need mental health and substance abuse treatment into those. We get people counsel sooner rather than later. It's frustrating, I think, for our city prosecutors to not know where defendants are, but it's frustrating for OPD to not know where their clients are. And getting people to their counsel sooner makes a difference. And secondly, I'm amazed by the technology that comes out of our pretrial monitoring partners. I think there are 4. They rotate, and they can, they can tell you with precision where people are, and more importantly, where they should be. So the pretrial monitoring providers are helping people saying, gosh, you have these warrants in justice courts and these warrants in district court. You're going to get dings on your GPS monitor reminding you to go. So it is different, I think, than just being out on the street.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, let's start, Councilmember Joy, and then we'll go to the scheduling issue.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to kind of ask a little bit of a question, and I know that as council voted to put the 500,000 aside, but we know right now that the state of Montana is sending 120 prisoners to Arizona because of overcrowding in Deer Lodge. So we know that Deer Lodge doesn't have any space, or we wouldn't be sending them to Arizona. So not talking particularly about the misdemeanor aspect of it, but those, is it clear how many people are sitting in a detention center who should be in Deer Lodge? And since Deer Lodge is already full and they're being sent to Arizona, is this a hamster on a wheel? Thank you.
We were tracking those numbers. The height of COVID was about 100, and then it dropped to about 50. I don't know the current numbers. Does anybody know the number? About 80. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there are, my estimation, when I talked to probation and parole, they said there were 50, but they said only 25 of those would be eligible to, and it shall be in Deer Lodge where those people are coming out of. So they would either, those people, those 25 out of Billings, and I don't know if that's Billings or the Billings region. Because usually when you talk to probation and parole, they speak in terms of region. So it would, I mean, hey, if it even loosens up 25 beds, that's 25 beds we didn't have. So I think they're aware, and I think our local legislators are working with DOC Director Gookin, because they want to get as many as they can out of Yellowstone County as well.
Okay, thank you. Council, so you heard Chris's question for our next work session on this topic. We have two choices. December 4th, we'll be getting more input from staff in the way of a packet, I hope, before we just show up. And that to be the regular Monday night work session, or another option was December 7th. Two items to remind you of on scheduling on the 4th during the day. We have, at least currently, scheduled the City Council tour of the new City Hall at 3:30 in the afternoon. And then on the 7th at 2 o'clock, and I don't think you've gotten a notice of this yet, but is the planned ribbon cutting for the Skyline Trail at 2 o'clock. Also, the Council Operations Committee is scheduled to meet at 4 o'clock, but that could be canceled as well. So just wanted to alert you to those couple issues. Council, what's your pleasure? Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I'm not available December the 7th, but Monday sounds good.
Okay. I'm hearing some nods for sticking with Monday at the council time, and that's Councilmember Tidswell's preference as well. Does anybody have any problem with that?
And then at the library or here?
And I'm assuming that at the library we would stick with that. Okay.
Mayor, may I ask?
Councilmember Roy?
I think one of the things that would be important to me is the opportunity for other stakeholders to participate. I think it's important we go to the library because it's a more conversational environment, but I think there's other stakeholders that may be interested. And so I don't know if council members are willing to consider that, or if I'm the only one who thinks there could be other people invited to join a conversation that is very focused on public safety and solutions, as Councilmember Purington has appropriately said. So I would just ask if I'm alone in that belief that there should be other voices at the table.
I doubt you're alone in that, but you want to maybe throw out 4 or 5 ones immediately spring to mind.
Well, sure. I mean, the county springs to mind, right? In multiple ways, the jail, the county attorney's office. I think having some of the task force partners that the chief has mentioned would be great. I think if there's the option to have the U.S. Attorney's Office or a representative, that would be great, in person or by Zoom. the Attorney General's office. So there are other people who really heavily weigh in here to the solution component of it, not to mention members of the public who may have thoughts about prevention. I mean, obviously, we can't do everything in one night, but the only reason that I worry about an evening conversation is it's just hard for those other stakeholders to participate. So I could also not do Thursday. That's not a day day or evening that I could do, but anyhow, those are my thoughts.
Okay, Councilmember Gulick, you had your hand up.
I guess I would just say that, I could be open to, just as we have executive sessions sometimes at 4, I could do earlier. I would rather it be in a late afternoon if it's not at our usual time, just so that it doesn't fracture the day. But yeah, this is an opportunity to, it's not going to be nearly as productive if we don't have other stakeholders, so, and engage in dialogue in a way that we can't in this format.
Councilmembers Boyette and Puritan?
I guess I've been thinking about this as one thing, we talk about safety, well, that's a big deal. I almost think that we need to figure out what we're going to talk about before we have the meeting, rather than just throw out the word safety and have everybody from different parts talk about everything. I mean, we have to come up with what's the most important topic and drill down one at a time rather than just safety in general. I guess that's the only thing that bothers me is we get too many talking and nothing happens.
Yeah, I guess I would have some concern inviting what could be really, I call them important people, for a big shotgun, and then they could be a little frustrated if we didn't have a good agenda. Councilmember Puritan, Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Rupsis.
Well, I think the only thing that I would add to that is if you invited either the U.S. Attorney or the Attorney General, that they could Zoom in, they don't have to be here. But I agree with, it has to be a little bit more succinct what we're going to be talking about. I would add, and I think this, because people don't normally talk with them, is to have possibly Judge Fair, because she heads that CJCC, and also local attorney or county attorney Twido. He's always willing to do something. I don't know. I think we could invite local legislators, but I don't know that they need to be part of the program at this point.
Okay, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think it's fundamentally the most important question that we ask and that gets answered is, what is public safety for our city? Before you invite judges shouldn't be deciding what public safety is for our community. Prosecutors should not be deciding what is public safety for our community. The people who should be answering the question, what does public safety look like, are ordinary people who live in the city, who are part of our neighborhoods, who are part of our schools, that are part of our hospitals, that are part of our community. They need to answer, because judges will decide based on the law. Prosecutors will be judging or deciding based on the law and the evidence. But who's deciding what it should look like, what it should feel like to be safe in our community? Are ordinary people. They should be members of our community who are living in our community. Not that prosecutors don't live here, but they're going to base it on the basis of their expertise and their duty, which is the law. The law is not safety. So I think fundamentally, we need to have people answer the question, what is public safety? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rupsis.
I apologize, Mayor, I didn't think I had my hand up, but I will just take a second just to echo Mike's
you were
comments.
thinking.
Just to echo Mike's comments, I have no idea what the agenda is that we're talking about here. I don't know. I guess we're going to the library for a conversation, but I'm not sure what the topic is or what the agenda is, so I'm really concerned about inviting all these people just for kind of a big dog and pony show if we don't have any kind of concrete objectives out of the meeting.
Okay, Councilmember Rowan.
Thanks. I think we're capable of formulating an agenda. I believe in us. I think we can do that. But I also was sort of hoping that tonight we would hear the outcomes from the leadership retreat, because I understand there was a deeper dive on the priorities, and I was hoping to get a preview of that, because it seems like whatever was discussed could at least formulate the basis of some action items that could be part of shaping that agenda. So I don't know, Chris, if that's still being digested and developed, or if it's ready to be shared, but I would think that reformulation or deeper dive or whatever would be a significant part of that agenda. I also think there is value to having different stakeholders in the room weighing in on a sort of structured set of questions or objectives.
So,
Go ahead, Chris.
Mayor and Council, two components. So the clear answer there is we are still digesting it. I think, though, there's two very significant areas that got a lot of our attention, and I think they get a lot of our attention in this conversation in our community. Are we talking about prevention, which is a really big bucket of stakeholders, partners, conversation, or is the focus on intervention or law enforcement? And all need to be dealt with, but I think all three are too much in one conversation. So clear direction from you guys, splitting that difference. Are we focused on prevention for that night? Are we focused on the intervention in law enforcement or the system, criminal justice system side of it? I think invites a very different group of people. All are welcome. All are welcome in our community, and all who are involved in this are welcome. We all know that. But as far as the invites and please sit at the table with us, please, I think we need to define which one of those two paths we're going to go.
And Chris, I'm going to comment on that. To the extent we have to make a choice, and there's only limited time, right? And I understand that under limited resources. My vote would be for the law enforcement side of it. It is simply shorter term, more immediate result. It's not to say that prevention is not important or may even in the long term be more effective, but we need short term, more immediate response would be my personal vote. Councilor Ripsis?
Mayor, I'd probably be on the other side of that, right? I think the law enforcement criminal justice side is getting a ton of attention right now through the CJCC and other very public meetings, and public or not public, but lots of attention right now, lots of focus. But where we're not putting the focus is on this long-term strategy of what does prevention look like. And I think our time would be much better served trying to drill down into understanding, developing that strategy that 2 years ago, honestly, when we came in right after the public safety levy was passed, we're like, we need to have a strategy on prevention. And we're still sitting here without really a clear idea of what that strategy is. So I would say if now is the time where we're going to focus on something, I'd rather focus on the prevention side because we're just not doing that right now, whereas other very involved conversations, including a lot of people at this table, are already happening on the enforcement and criminal justice side.
I don't know that you're going to get a consensus on that one then, Chris. But further discussion on it, I guess, on that topic. Councilmember Irwin, I heard you.
I'm not sure we
Councilmember Trickey?
have to have consensus because we don't only have to talk about this once. I think the public wants to see a rapid response to multiple deaths in this community. I think tactically what the police chief and BPD is working on is their business, right? But there are definitely barriers that they're encountering, initiatives, the ability to mobilize resources, funding, all those things that are rapid response that I think we can and should have a voice in. But you are right, Councilmember Rupes, we could do much more on prevention, and maybe that's just the very next meeting, right? I would not ever want to lose sight on prevention because it is critically where we need to focus time and develop a plan, just as you've said. But I think the community deserves to see a rapid response effort that is beyond just saying, BPD, you guys are doing great, because they are. But there are barriers that they are facing that I think we can be allies and supporters in. So that would be my recommendation is first, as the mayor has suggested, the law response, the rapid response, and then second or third, fourth, and fifth, prevention.
Councilmember Trickey?
My sense of what this meeting is going to turn out to be is a whole bunch of people standing up and telling us that the crime level is unacceptable in Billings, Montana right now. And we'll probably hear that message over and over and over again for 2 hours or however long we decide to sit there and listen to it. If we're going to talk about solutions, the problem is so complex and layered. I mean, the data systems need to be fixed. The way we fund various things need to be fixed. The convergence stuff that that is coming up, from our public partners, is just beginning to start to figure out exactly what it is that's going on and where we're going with it and stuff like that. Yeah, okay, if you want to send a message that, yeah, we're listening to you and we're doing something, I'm sure we can do that. But at the same time, without a focus on a specific set of things and bringing the specific experts into the room that can talk about those things, it's going to be more political theater than it is actually moving anything forward. And a good example of this is that one of the things that has been lost in our conversation in all of this is that our community partners brought us a solution that they asked for $50,000 to fund, and we discussed it in council, and we said, hey, the budget committee needs to take a look at it, and we haven't heard back as to what.
Did I not send that email? Oh, shoot. Hold, please.
I didn't get it if it didn't go out.
Sorry.
But the proposal from alternatives to one of the biggest thing that I saw from the very beginning about the jail is that right now we require these people to pay for their own ankle bracelets if they're going to use an ankle bracelet to get out. I don't have any idea how many people that would take out of there, but if it has to have some impact, 5, 10 beds, whatever, and that is what that alternatives proposal was for us to give them money to, so that people would not have to pay themselves in order to get an ankle bracelet. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're walking through the door right over there, there's a piece of paper right there that lays out the program and what it costs and everything on it.
Okay, Councilmember Rowland, Councilmember Tricky, do you want to comment on
So,
that?
yeah, I will send that email. I'm sorry, I thought I had, but I think Councilmember Purington sits on the board at Alternatives and has represented that that's been funded.
Councilmember Purington.
It has been. And Dave and I were arguing about, well, you wanted 100,000 from council. He goes, no, only 50,000. But now we voted on coming to council asking for 20,000. So they did get some grant money. And I agree with you, Danny, on people paying for their own bracelets. I do. I think that's part of the issue is that some of them don't have the resources. But I, and so I think there is some funding there. I don't know how they're going to split it up. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as it has to do with municipal court, that's the only place, as far as I'm concerned, that those bracelets should go, if we give them any money.
Could you get ask Dave for clarification on that and
Sure,
give us
because I
a
need to talk
heads
to him
up?
about something else. I
Okay,
definitely will.
that'd be great.
But I have one other thing to say about, the program, or what we're going to talk about, the topics. And I think, honestly, as much as I've worked with various people throughout the criminal justice system with, on the different committees and everything, I mean, we may know a little bit about this, we may know a little bit about that, we may know a little bit about this, but we don't know that continuum. And I think in order to address prevention, you need to address the intervention, what's going on. I mean, I just think it's just so important to have the full continuum of information. And I don't know that any one of us, maybe there are a couple here on this dais that has that. I certainly don't. And so to include the judicial system and, to have Judge Kolar and Judge Fair here, I think that's great. I'm not particularly sure that we want to have the U.S. Attorney or the Attorney General. I mean, I don't think that's here and there. But just, the legislators, the sheriffs, those people, and of course the PD. If we have task force officers here, I mean, they can tell you streetwise what's going on. And I think I'm amazed every time I talk to a police officer and some of the things that they're doing. And how they've reset their priorities and how they're working with each other. I'm just so impressed with that. But yet they still have challenges. So I just think it's good for us to hear what those challenges are within those different departments, because we all have to work together at some point.
So,
Okay, I think we need to take a break, and I want to wrap, and I want to finish this up. And I'm prepared to make sort of a little summary of where we're at, but Chris, did you want to comment? And
what I heard there, I mean, if we approach it that way, what I heard is a baseline of understanding is the foundation of this, which isn't staff coming in with a draft of strategy. It is, the goal would be to gain a baseline of understanding. That's different than coming in with a draft set of strategies and objectives and action items. And then some want prevention. So I don't know if the mayor and I and deputy mayor, between the three of us, we figured out if we can't get clear direction out of the 11. But that's where I just don't want to be truly. And trying to get better at this is part of what we also talked about at the retreat, is it doesn't help leaving here with a just go figure it out, Chris.
Yeah, so Chris, here's what I'm going to propose, and I apologize, I'm cutting off Councilmember Treek, but I want everybody to know what my suggestion would be, and I recognize Councilmember Treek, I want to give him a chance, but what I suggest is first of all, whatever emerges here, you work on a specific of a proposed or set of action items or whatever you think appropriate with your department heads and the chief as possible, because none of us want to go into this thinking we're going to solve the problem of crime in Billings. We're just going to create some really overinflated expectations, right? So we got to take this elephant and at least chew on the tail. You know, one small piece, maybe lots of sub pieces, but try to be as specific as possible. Second, what I would suggest is, because you do need some direction on this big question of prevention versus law enforcement response, and there's legitimate positions on both, and we all would agree that both are, and others, parts of that are important. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. I'll say number one, which I guess would be the law enforcement part, and then I'll say number two, and you can make your own count. And then if you have time, you can move into the agenda, or if it seems to be truly evenly split, you can take that into account. But I don't think anybody opposes at least having that. You don't have to vote, but hopefully that'll help you a little bit. And then the last thing, involving others. Sure. And I would suggest that you come up with a list of invitations. I would recommend we don't ask the governor to appear at this, you know, or the attorney general or the U.S. attorney. But if there's some local people who you know are key players based on the agenda you come up with, and that their time would be well used, either observing or getting questions or dialoguing with us, great. And let us know who those are. Probably not 10 people. You know, a smaller group, and then council, once you see that list, if you see an obvious deficiency, contact Chris, contact the council, and see if you can add or subtract it from the list. So that's what I would propose, that we move ahead. It's kind of break time, but before, if that sounds okay, before we go ahead with any sort of hand poll, I did want to give the word to Councilmember Treaky.
Thank you. So kind of, following up with Councilmember Purington was saying, and you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, we need to figure out the focus. And I think the focus very obviously should be on what are the current barriers, what are the problems that need to be solved in the various different areas that we're talking about in here. So the way to do this might very well be to plan on having a number of these and slice and dice the entire system up so that we can have, like, you know, 2 or 3 people who are experts in one area come and talk to us about what's going on in that area, what the barriers are and whatnot. I can guarantee you there is nobody that understands what's going on with our law and order system in the United States, much less just here in Billings, you know, so I think we have to take it a piece and a step at a time.
Yeah, that would certainly want to be part of our agenda, is next steps, because this is only step one. So council, before we take a break, if that is acceptable to you, what I scheduled or set out, this would be a hand poll, informal poll for, I think what we settled on was the regular schedule, December 4th, Monday at 5:30 for this first step process. And the two alternatives, generally speaking, were law enforcement and prevention. So those two emphases, recognize that we may have to get into both to some degree. So first, I'll just ask council members to raise their hand for the law enforcement option, and then I'll ask for the prevention option as an area of emphasis. Is that clear enough? Okay, so the first one, that's sort of the law enforcement immediate side of it. So if you think that should be the emphasis, raise your hand. And somebody's making some counts. I'm not looking. Oh, and Councilmember Neese has a yellow hand up. And if emphasizing the prevention side of the equation, please raise your hand. So you got your count there. So clearly not unanimity, as there shouldn't be.
That's clarity. Thank you.
I think we already had public comment on this item. Council, I'm going to give us a break now if there's nothing else. Councilmember Shaw, something else?
Can I just make one quick comment on this, which is that I haven't found the last hour of our discussion particularly all that helpful. The chief's update was great. I took a bunch of notes during that. We've kind of gone around and around of reiterating the same thing of we have a crime problem, we need to do something about it. 100% agree. I don't want to spend 2 or 3 hours just getting a baseline of the system. I personally feel like I have enough of an understanding. A 5-10 minute recap is all I need for that. I think that would be a waste of council's time, in my opinion. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Very good. I think a lot of us would agree. Let's get down into the weeds. Okay, council, appreciate your time. It is 7:36. Let's come back around 7:45 or earlier, and we will finish up with items 3, the equipment replacement plan, and 4, capital improvement plan. All right, I think we're, well, welcome back, everyone. We left off at item number 3, our equipment replacement plan, and I believe Andy is our presenter with some help.
Kevin's on vacation tonight, so, well, he's been here a few years, so he's with his family this week. The other time he was off hunting unsuccessfully, but.
Good evening. My name is Nick Westberg with the Fleet Services Division, and I'm here to present the FY24 Equipment Replacement Plan.
Welcome, Nick.
We good? All righty. Our ERP committee members this year are Andy Zeller, Matt Hoppel, myself, Josh Smith, Kyle Foreman, Jamie Bratley, Derek Miller, David Cardillo, Scott Emmerich and Amanda Skewis, Mick McCarthy, Dave Green, and Brandon Schmidt. The ERP is a mechanism to replace and fund the city's equipment. Equipment with a useful life of 3 years or more and a value of $5,000 or more. The ERP is based on a 20-year plan, and in this plan, we establish guidelines for review consideration based off mileage or hours and age. We further establish replacement costs and salvage values, and we have consistent funding through annual contributions. There are also provisions for additional and upgraded equipment known as SBRs or supplemental budget requests. Here are just some pictures that we have for equipment that's proposed for FY25. Sanitation in particular has 2 rear load garbage trucks, 3 side load garbage trucks, and 4 front load garbage trucks, as well as a compactor for the landfill. Street department has a 2 Vector 2100 jet trucks, like on the bottom left. And water department has 1 floating dredge that is 20 years old. When we started this process, we started with 216 pieces of equipment eligible for replacement. We were able to defer 148, leaving 68 recommended for replacement. Of those 68, 1982 is going from IT to library.
That's good. Many of us on the staff all reminisced about, in our families, we had one of those Astro vans, so we want to keep that in the fleet somehow.
Maybe the Western Heritage Center or the County Museum would be interested.
FY25 replacement summary. So basically, the left-hand column will be all the departments that participated in this year's ERP. To the right of that is the plan amount, and then we have the SBRs or supplemental budget requests, followed by city funding, and then the grant funding. And you'll see all of our totals at the bottom. Replacement by department. So sanitation makes up 34% of this year's ERP. They get that from those 9 garbage trucks and 1 compactor we talked about earlier. Sanitation's followed by Met, Airport, and Street. Those 4 departments make up 84% of this year's ERP. And for the next 3 slides, I'm going to ask Andy to come up and talk about them.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. So this slide represents the planned funding or planned expenses out of the ERP over the next 5 years. You guys have seen this before, but typically because of all those deferrals that Nick had talked about, that next year out is quite a bit higher than the current year. And we expect that next year it'll look quite similar. So 11.5 million for 2025. If this plan is adopted as presented, that's what goes into the budget along with other capital planning documents to help kind of build the foundation of starting the budget. So the equipment replacement plan, I'm going to go back 1 slide. This plan captures all rolling stock at the city, regardless of department or funding source. For the governmental funds, which is primarily police, fire, it's your tax-supported entity or divisions, departments. So police, fire, parks, library, code enforcement, and I'm probably missing one other one, but those are the major stakeholders there. We charge them an annual budget allocation, set it aside so that when that expenditure comes up, we have the funds there. So that annual funding is that kind of more slow and steady growth line. It's easier to budget for and plan for. The line that represents a lot of peaks and valleys, that's the planned replacement. So we are anticipating that in 2037, when we've got what I presume to be multiple fire trucks, probably on the schedule there, that's why it's so high, we'll have the funds on hand to be able to pay that expense. We won't be scrambling to borrow money or figure out what we're going to cut to do this. It's just, it's a great plan. It's been functioning for 23 years now, very well. So very commendable for the city to have this. The departments that don't participate in the reason we have those funds participate in an actual funding plan is because those funds typically are more competitive when they, if we held it in the general fund, there'd be a lot of discussion about, oh, well, let's spend some of that money on this thing or that thing. This way we know that when it comes time to replace those police vehicles or fire vehicles, we've got those funds set aside for that purpose. When it comes to water, wastewater, solid waste, they're already separated in a separate fund for those specific operations. We can't take funds from solid waste, as you know, and use it for police. So that's going to be set there, accumulating for those sanitation truck replacements. So this slide represents the expenditure side of those non-governmental expenses, but the funds in all of those departments are set aside again within that department. And I believe that's it. I think that's, unless Nick wants to, we have some committee members here. I think they should stand up and be recognized. They dressed so nicely and showed up.
Yeah, Andy, if you just introduce anybody who's on the committee.
Oh, gosh. I thought Nick was going to do this.
Or Nick,
Derek from Streets, Scott from Public Works. I'm not sure what division. I apologize. That's D&C, right? Yeah, there you go. Brandon from Cemetery and Parks, and then obviously Nick, our fearless leader in Fleet. So he's puts in all the real work here.
Good. Okay, thank you. I bet you we'll have some questions. Start down here for change. Councilmember Ripsis, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy or whoever, the cost of this equipment is guesstimated for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. Well, what happens when we get there and we go, oh, goodness, we made a mess. That car is now $40,000, we budgeted $30,000. How do you calculate, that expense, or do you just guesstimate in the future?
So that's why we have our SBRs, supplemental budget requests. And we have seen a lot of that, especially in police cars. And
Yeah, so let me back up for a second. So Nick, some of you might have remembered Larry DeShane. Larry, I think, was here possibly since the beginning of the program, right? Built the program, was here for many decades, built a pretty phenomenal system. Then we had some bumps in the road, lots of bumps in the road. And Nick took over and has been doing fantastic, but this is his first year at this. So he's been helping us work through what was fantastic that fell apart and putting it back together and getting us back on the track. So I appreciate all the work he's come in. And so Andy's got a little bit of institutional background that, in fairness, Nick doesn't have. So
Stay up here. Most questions will be for you. Okay. So Nick's exactly right. That's what the SBRs are there for. It's those unplanned funding shortfalls. But we look at the long term over 20 years, and so we'll set a vehicle and say, okay, we think this is going to go up by 4% per year, and that's why that line isn't flat. It actually goes up slightly over time because we're anticipating growth in those expenses. But yeah, we've realized some real shortfalls in that lately. In my time here, which is pretty short, I mean, it's 9 years, the majority of that time we have found that we've been slightly overfunded by $1,000 or so. So I think long-term, it's a great plan. Short-term, we do have to find other funding sources. Typically, it's going to those departments and saying, hey, you need an extra 35,000 to cover 7 more vehicles. You know, we had 90% of it, which is awesome. So we've got a little bit more to add, and we just work to figure that out through the budget process. You bet.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Pearson?
Okay, so just so that I understand, and I'm in section 4, and I don't know what page I'm on, but anyway, it's with the police department, and it has total cost, 270K, amount in plan is 241.5, and then the requested amount is 28,000 plus. It's at the very back. I don't know, I just flipped to it because it had red on it. It has red in the transportation. And all I'm asking about that is, so whatever that 28.4 is from 241, that's what's going to stay in the ERP for subsequent years, correct? This is all the money you're just pulling out of that particular plan.
No, so that 28,495 would be, that's what their SBR is. So they have $241,505 in the plan, and they're projecting that the total costs are going to be $270,000. So they're asking for an additional $28,495
Okay, I guess I gotta
for
look
a
at that
supplemental
different.
budget request.
Gotcha.
You can write a check.
I'll write a check, yeah. It'll be on my retirement, my pension plan. So the other question that I had in going through just some of these, I mean, there's a bucket load of these. I didn't read every one of them. But there are a lot of them that have the mileage on it, so at 100,000 miles. Now, granted, the police cars, I'm sure, at 100,000 miles, because those are usually driven pretty hard from time to time. But do we ever consider going over the 100,000 because aren't engines lasting longer nowadays? And what about the hours on some of the equipment? I know you don't want to run it completely down in the ground so that you can't either salvage it to sell someplace else or transfer into another department. But is there a thought process in extending to 150,000 miles?
That's a very good question.
Well, thank you. Sometimes
Thank
that
you for
happens,
that.
but not often.
So our guidelines for a police car are, let's say 100,000, 130,000 maybe. Yeah, 100 to 130,000.
Where are you?
That would be the last page on section 1, would be our equipment replacement guidelines.
Yeah, it was in our packet. Go ahead.
So for police cars, the meter life is anywhere from 100 to 130,000. The police cars that we have been selling lately have roughly around 170,000, so they are going over. Yeah. And part of that is because when we purchase replacements for them, those replacements, they don't come in for about 10 months. So we keep, yeah, exactly. So when these police cars, or any equipment for that matter, finally does leave our fleet, it is way over on the guidelines. Yes.
Oh, sorry. So just one other question. I think that boat looks perfect. It looks like one of those old tour boats, and as long as it's staying afloat, I'd say.
The city will make you a good deal on that.
We don't
for
care what it looks like.
Councilmember Tidswell? Good. Councilmember Tricky?
I'm fine, thank you.
Two questions, since Councilmember Purrington addressed the vehicle issue. The price limit's been $5,000 since like late 1700s, I think.
Yeah.
That's a staff level decision, but and very, very few are of that level, so in a sense it doesn't matter. But I would think you might want to check how it looks like under inflation versus when we started, and
Yeah.
bump that up to 10 or 15,000 if that would make it simpler for people. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Does anybody have any idea what that number would look like if it were adjusted for inflation? based on when it was started, whenever. So, okay, well, I just throw that out for your further consideration in the future. And then the last thing is just this rate of deferral, which we see every year. This year, it is half of what we anticipate for next year. And I appreciate that because it kind of reflects conservative budgeting and an attempt to push expenses later, like that police car that has 170,000 miles on it. But it seems to me we're kind of fooling ourselves, and we're kind of playing a little mental mind games, and that be maybe better, or at least more accurate, to actually try to come up with an accurate prediction as close as possible, instead of a super conservative one that always shows that deferral rate to be huge, because it is every year. Is that good budgeting, and should we be looking to be more realistic and have those retirements later so that we are more realistic?
So that's a very good question. Thank you. One thing I've noticed about all those deferrals, so for instance, last year we had 178. This year we had 148. One thing I've noticed, and I was just talking to Derek about it, most of those referrals, or when we push those equipment to the next year, it's seasonal equipment. So, for instance, last year Derek got rid of an asphalt roller. It was on the ERP. It was approved. I believe he ordered another one, but you still have the 1203. So that's a asphalt roller. That's a piece of equipment. It's a seasonal piece of equipment. It only gets used in the summer. And even at that, during an 8-hour shift, it gets used maybe 2 hours. So that piece of equipment, for instance, is a 1995. Still has super low hours, low miles. So we've kept it around, and the department has kept deferring it year after year after year because it was still a good piece of equipment. And when I look at all the deferrals, when I get them back from all the departments every year, that's basically what I'm seeing, is most of them are, that style of equipment.
Yeah, and that's great, and we want to encourage that, and wouldn't want to do anything to discourage that. And I guess I was less concerned about the number of deferrals as the dollar value. So, for example, this year's budget is $11.5 million versus next year's predicted at 23.5. But if we go to Las Vegas, I bet you they're predicting it's going to be pretty close to our 11.5 more traditional average. So, again, it's something to think about if there's advantages being more realistic. So, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a question about, maybe not clear. I have a question about inflation in terms of what have you been seeing for this year and the previous year, and do you have any idea of what it might be for the coming year? Because we've gone through this spike in prices, and some people say it's not a spike, it will be a kind of forever added cost that we didn't see previously. So that's kind of important for your crystal ball in terms of what you're putting aside for vehicles. So I just wanted to know, are you going off of any previous data, or how are you trying to track a little bit of what your, I'm not going to call inflation, but higher prices are going to be?
Yeah, and we're going to have to raise the percentage in our ERP. Just in the last year, police cars have went up 27%. They've went from roughly 38,000, and now I believe they're at 48,000. Garbage trucks, a lot. They've really went up. Basically across the board, everything has. You try to predict if it's going to level off or if it's going to keep going. I don't think anybody knows. I think it will continue to rise. People are paying it. We just had that conversation. As long as people are paying it, it'll hold there. They're not going to lower the price. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Rowan. Oh, I didn't have. Okay, Councilmember Neese, did you have anything?
Just a quick question. I think most of the questions were asked and answered, but Andy, what is the actual rate, or maybe you know this, but what's the actual rate that you're growing that fund by? Is there, are you have a predictable inflation rate you're using today, right now?
Councilmember Neese, the inflationary factor is actually on each individual piece of equipment. I want to say most of them are right around 4%. But yeah, it is per piece of equipment.
It is per equipment. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Gulick.
More compliment, I guess, on the work that the fleet does in maintaining the many fleets that we have. And very, certainly had tours of them, of all the different kinds of equipment we see there. And I'm really pleased to see that they get a long life. They're really well taken care of. Our equipment looks great when it's out in the city. We take good care of it. And, I think all the taxpayers should feel good that we're doing a good job with everything that they paid for. So just appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaw. Okay. Very good. Then we'll open up. This is a public hearing. Or actually, it's not a public hearing. It's just an opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody who would like to comment on the equipment replacement plan? If so, please come to the podium. There's no one online. There's nobody coming. So we'll close the public comment period. We'll see this December 11th is when it'll be on our agenda, business agenda. Anything else, Chris? Anything else, council, on the equipment replacement plan?
No, and based on previous history and tonight's question, I would probably put the ERP on consent agenda, unless I can't, but I think we can. The CIP, but we'll probably put the ERP on consent. It's usually pretty straightforward, and so thank you very much, and thanks to Nick and his leadership, and as Councilmember Gulick reiterated, we do have a well-maintained fleet, and we maximize the life out of it, and that's fantastic. So those guidelines are just that. They're guidelines. Every year when you see that push, that big number, that's because they're not just replacing it because the number's there. But the mayor and I got to talk about this earlier, and I think it is worthwhile, especially with inflation, with what's happening, that next year we'll look harder at how long can we stretch the life on these.
Yeah, on that point, Chris, I mean, I understand completely what staff is doing. You're looking at how many pieces of equipment are going to be within that replacement period based on hours or miles, and then they assume, if I understand the process correctly, that 100% of those are going to have to be replaced, because that's really conservative. But we know from history that in reality it's going to be much, much less than that. And so if we look back in our past history, we could probably apply a factor of actual replacement versus theoretical replacement. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's at least more accurate. So, okay, thanks everybody. We'll move on then to item number 5, the capital improvement plan. Is this also, Andy, you're going to lead us off? Just as a reminder for the council and especially the public, this is our second discussion. We had a very lengthy discussion on the capital improvement plan several weeks ago. So we're not going to be able to hit and don't want to hit every item. But we had deferred consideration of, in particular, the parks budget, and we've got our parks director with us while we waited for the results on the vote on the park bond. That, of course, failed, and so the budget committee has also met and made some recommendations with staff that are described in the in your packet, which I'm sure you've already read, but for any members of the public who are interested, you can go on the website and see what those recommendations are in the city council packet. With that, City Budget Director Andy Zeller.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So thank you, Mayor, for setting that up. I'll actually grab my notepad really quick. So you had the CIP for a while. As you mentioned, well, as you're aware, there was a lot in there contingent on the bond passing. It did not. So the majority of the focus for this evening is, what do you want to do about those projects? We met with the Budget and Finance Committee committee last week, have some recommendations and suggestions, but certainly want to get your feedback, thoughts on this, and we have some additional information as well to share with you, I think, regarding a couple of questions from the committee as well as possibly from last week's meeting. So, with that, I'll get started. There's supposed to be lightning inside the words there. I don't know why it didn't work. I was given some encouragement to spice it up a little bit, so maybe that's the right word. So this shows here the projects that were all had an element of the bond. So the recommendation from staff in conjunction with the committee was, to make some adjustments, right? Remove some projects, modify others, and first and foremost, those top 6, just due to lack of funding, the recommendation is to pull them out of the CIP. The bottom must be 10. There's either questions that I need from you guys, what direction do you want to go, things you should start thinking about, or recommendations that we have for you guys as well on adjustments to make on those projects. So I'm only going to go through the modify ones. The rec center. So we're recommending removing the GO-funded portion at $86 million. But then the question is, what do you want to do with the bonding capacity in the South TIF? There's $25 to $30 million approximately in bonding capacity there. Is there a desire to keep something in the CIP, a project plan there? There certainly will be a discussion about that. But I'd encourage you to think about that. If we were to include something there in the CIP, probably not in FY25, but in future years, that's just my estimation. It would be through debt financing from the South TIF fund, as that's the only identified funding source. For Poly Vista, the recommendation from the committee was, as well as staff, was to say, hey, we have some, we want to support that fundraising effort that's going on. Mike wasn't there to tell us, hey, we're doing that, and reminded me today that the FY24 budget contains $220,000 to pave the parking lot as well as put in some accessible sidewalk or paths to and around the playground. The playground is what Landon's Legacy is currently fundraising for. We kind of quantified that as phase 2 of the project. If council wants to continue to further support fundraising efforts with Landon's Legacy, we could put some funds in there or in the CIP, the recommended probably FY26, 27. They would be for the splash pad, which is the last item remaining. But that is not currently, my understanding, what Landon's Legacy is fundraising for. They are currently fundraising for the playground. So this here, though, would be the funding source, I think, would have to be some sort of debt financing. We potentially could put together $1 million. That's not that impossible, as long as we had enough time to start setting it aside. So I don't really have a specific identified funding source, but it would be the general fund, I guess, to be clear. It's just a matter of whether you wanted to borrow or set aside over time or eat that whole elephant at one bite. The next 2 projects, the West End Reservoir. The recommendation from the committee was to keep the $6 million in the project for FY27. This would be debt funded. There is potential to use the limited bonding capacity that exists at the city. It's essentially 10% of your general fund budget. Right now, I think you have about $5 million available. We've used that for the Evidence Center expansion. It's debt. Your annual appropriation comes from the general fund on that. So you potentially could bond that project in FY27. South Park Pool, the recommendation there is to keep it in the CIP. It's been identified as a need in this community. It's in pretty rough shape. So immediately in FY25, we'd like to see $400,000 for that engineering and design work. The aquatics facility plan is currently underway. That'll give some, I'll say, general parameters around what should be there. But $400,000 in FY25 would really further the efforts on engineering design work to make that project grant eligible, able to be bid, really answer a lot of questions on what is this going to cost to build. And then for purposes of the CIP, because I don't want to have a project in there that has no identified funding source, the recommendation is put 10 million in 26 or 27, which is our amount right now. Fully anticipate that would change as designs become more clear, and then identify it as debt funding. Now that's pretty vague because you don't have enough capacity between the 10 million on South Park and 6 million at the West End within your general fund borrowing capacity. So, the reality is if we go that route, you're going to have to prioritize what we're going to do there. An option of, I don't know what options exist outside of you're exceeding your capacity, so you have to go to voters at that point. Potentially there's grants though that are available. It is in a lower income part of town. It may be eligible for something. I'm not aware of anything, but if we had the good design work, potentially we could be eligible for some grant applications. The 25th Street Bridge, the recommendation here is to keep it in the CIP, but remove the general obligation debt funded portion. We have applied for a grant for this project, so we would keep it in there at 100% grant funded, knowing there if we should have the results of their grant application in, I'll say, spring of next year. If we find that we were fortunate enough to receive the grant, we'll proceed with the project. If not, we'll be back to the drawing board. But the recommendation for now is to leave it in there at 100% grant funded. Next item is Stagecoach Trail. This project, I believe, is at $5.5 million rounded. Okay, it's total $5.5 million. A substantial portion of that coming from the Transportation Alternatives program. There is a requirement for a local match. This project was in the bond for the local match portion of $705,000. Our recommendation is, well, I should back up. The TAP has been approved. TrailNet has committed $100,000 on this project. And so we're recommending that we continue to pursue this project. $705,000 is the local match. We are looking for, it's a trail stewardship grant that could provide up to $100,000 towards that grant. Billings TrailNet, I'm sure Chris will get up and talk about it. They're considering fundraising to further their contribution, but $705,000 would be the city match on that.
And I apologize, but just to clarify, is the 705 before the 100,000 that TrailNet has already committed, or is it net after that?
Net after that.
After that, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, that's on that project. I don't know that I have. There were some questions about engineering, what's been done, how we came up with that amount. Are we going to get in there and find we have $3 million of stabilization work to do? There has been engineering work done. Debbie has said I could tee her up for that response. Beyond that, I'm not qualified to say what engineering work has been done. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. And then all other trail projects, the recommendation is that we would leave them in the CIP. They are going to get adjusted in two ways. One, the TAP funding is going to provide a much more substantial portion of the project funding. The timeline, because we only get, $790,000, $800,000 a year in TAP funding, the timeline on these projects are going to be shifted. So some of them are going to be pushed way out, potentially even outside the scope of the CIP. I know Wyeth and his team have worked to timeline those. So they would not be in, I think FY27 is what they're in the current proposed CIP. But we'd shift the funding to TAP funding primarily, and then extend the timelines on them so those happen at a lot slower pace. And then there was some questions about the unimproved streets in Espard at the last CIP meeting. So I believe Jennifer DeRay sent you an email today that had a map of all the streets that are non-maintainable, unimproved gravel streets at this point in time. So the description in your CIP needs to be updated because I think it had old street names. Currently, the CIP has a total of 2.2 million, half in 26 and half in 27 for generically unimproved streets. Which specific streets I don't think have been prioritized yet or identified beyond the map you have, but there's $8 million or so on that map, so it's not going to do all of them. I think in consultation with South Billings as well as Public Works, input from council, of course, prioritizing those streets. The question here is, you know, from a policy standpoint, do we want to continue with what we've done in the past, which was they were primarily funded with tax increment funds, or do you want to take an approach that's, I'd say, more similar to the rest of the city where there's some ownership from the neighbors as well? So those are the areas that we know need some adjustment. Certainly want feedback from you guys. My plan, hopefully, is to walk away from here with some idea of generally what you guys want to see in the CIP. That way, I'm going to make some adjustments to what was given to you as the proposed. I'll obviously send it out to you very clearly. Here's what was removed, moved, changed, whatever. Then when we come back on December 11th, we're starting from a position that doesn't have 16 adjustments to begin with. We have a rough idea that, you know, the 86 million for the rec center is not going to be in there. So that's kind of what I'd like to walk away with tonight. I realize, you know, we're not going to get everything perfect, but certainly, again, any other projects, staff's here to talk about as well, but those are the ones I wanted to highlight and identify. That's all I've got. Mayor.
Very good. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Council, let's ask if there's any just kind of factual questions for Andy, and then we can have general discussion. I do want to get public comment before we go to discussion, just to let the public weigh in here as well. So, and then as we get to individual items, this will be an opportunity. We may have to have some votes to give direction to staff how to proceed. So, on questions, Councilmember Owen.
I just wanted to clarify a couple, excuse me, of the things that Andy had said about budget committee recommendations. Noting that we knew staff was going into a leadership retreat and might come out with different recommendations. So what Andy has presented might reflect that staff input more, and Mike and Ed can correct me, but I think the budget committee recommendation to council would be to prioritize South Park Pool for that GO bond funding, not the West End water treatment plant. The goal from the committee, at least, the recommendation was to keep the West End water treatment plant in the CIP for planning purposes so that we didn't lose sight of it and forget about it. But that really, I think the committee had pretty strong consensus that South Park Pool needs to be a priority. So the goal here was to keep moving forward on some of the design and engineering work in fiscal year 25, and then to work towards that fully funding based on what we understood coming out of that sooner rather than later. But the goal on the West End Reservoir was not to prioritize it over the South Park Pool, but merely to keep it in there for planning purposes. And then I think on Poly Vista, Andy's clarification is right, but I think the committee's understanding at least was that the fundraising is a little bit more in those out years. So it's not an FY25 $1 million match that would show up in the budget, excuse me, but rather something that would show up in those out years. And then I think, just to be clear on the stagecoach concern from the committee, it was the risk, right? Trying to understand if we accept the TAP funding and then put the local match towards it, what is the likelihood that the project will exceed both of those together so that we actually have to plan for something beyond what is being funded under the TAP grant, just because of the topography around the Stagecoach Trail. And we really had a great conversation. I know Christy Drake's in the audience, but she was a great supporter for our budget committee conversation about that. I don't know if I missed anything else from the budget committee, but I did want to just clarify those couple of things. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. And I think we will want to hear from Debbie on the risk of overage on the Stagecoach Trail. While we're trying to get questions out, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a question for Director Pig about South Park Pool and the Rec Center. Good evening. The Sabura has the bonding capacity for $25 million. The funding source for South Park Pool isn't identified, not quite sure on that. What are the benefits, what are the costs, what are the pros and cons of moving forward with some kind of aquatic center on the land that was purchased for the multi-generational rec center? And what are the pros and cons of putting a pool there and not having the pool located at South Park? Obviously, I can see the distance is one of the major obstacles, but from your point of view, and I know you're doing an aquatics planning feasibility study or whatever, planning kind of document. Can you talk through that a little bit? What would be the problem if the South Billings Aquatic went forward as an aquatic center and then not have South Park Pool? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think one of the big things is the aquatic study is going to identify that for us too somewhat. So it kind of tell us what the needs are and how, if we were to move that pool, what that would look like. But also I think there's going to be some competition for that Sabura money, whether it's, is it going to be an ice facility? Is it going to be water? Is it going to be course? And so I think there's already that competition for that money that's already being discussed. I don't believe any finalized plans have come forward for what that would look like. It would definitely be an alternative though. So I think, the aquatic center that we were looking at was an indoor facility versus an outdoor facility. There's some, differences there in like maintenance costs and staffing levels too. So there's a whole number of factors there that would have to be looked at, and hopefully the aquatic study will help us identify some of that. But I do think the competition for that money as to, is it going to be ice? Is it going to be courts? Is it going to be, an aquatic center? That's going to be quite a discussion.
Just a little bit of a follow-up. I don't think that you would have an answer to this, but if you're having consultants and doing some planning, could you look into where the kids around South Park Pool, which schools they go to? Is it possible to kind of get that? Because what I'm thinking is we have Newman School, Ponderosa School, and Orchard School that are not very far from the property off of South Frontage Road, South Billings Boulevard. And I'm wondering if there's a way we could kind of quantify how many kids would be impacted by closing the South Park Pool, as opposed to the number of kids that might benefit if they're at Orchard, Newman, or Ponderosa School. So, I think that's a little bit probably beyond the scope, but, if there was some way we could kind of quantify that, maybe it would make the decision a little bit easier about how that might be planned and the impact on activities that we would want to move forward with in the multi-generational rec center.
We can talk to our consultant and see if that's, how that would fit into the scope that they've already been, tasked with. Also, we could maybe start to discuss with our partners that bring kids to the center and find out where they're being schooled. And so find out maybe a little more detail in there, but it's really difficult. Especially since that pool is mostly, South Park Pool is a free pool. So even keeping track of the number of kids sometimes gets lost because it's, there's not an entry fee to go back and say, hey, well, we had 300 kids today. So sometimes that's a little difficult number to even attach to. So, but we can look at it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington, Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you. So, Andy, I think this is a question for you, just to get that understanding. So with the Sabura $25 million, that's their bonding capacity, which means that it still has to be approved by council for them to do that. Two, with that $25 million bonding capacity, that extends the life of that TIF district.
So just one, well, no, it does not extend the life of the district. We we issued debt, a year or two ago for the unimproved street projects to capture the full life. So any debt issued now has to be within that existing window. The bonding capacity is of the South TIF, so yes, council has to approve that. Council would approve whatever project these funds were used for. Of course, South Billings Urban Renewal SBURA would provide advice on what they'd like to see, what they think they'd make recommendations to you guys on that.
And so, just as a follow-up, Mr. Mayor, so those bond payments would be through taxpayer dollars, collected through the Urban Renewal District?
Through the tax increment fund, yes.
Okay. And then just one other question. I don't know if I was not here whenever we talked about this, but why is there $6 million set aside for the West End Reservoir? It's my understanding we haven't had a study done. I don't even know that we really have a design plan. So I'm just wondering why $6 million and how far is that going to go?
I'll give the first crack at it, and Debbie can add. $6 million first piece. Bond council's been very clear. The water utility can only fund what's necessary for the water utility.
No, yeah, I know that.
So that doesn't mean there isn't any amenities there, because we need to test water. There's some practical things you have to do that can have dual use. But more of the amenity components cannot be funded with the water utility. So we've been saying for several years here, we need to come up with a revenue source to cover that. To your second part of your question, $6 million is not going to build the video and the pictures that were shown around the community for the past 6 or 7 years. I mean,
Chris, I think the question actually was, why $6 million if we don't have plans?
Well, what we tried to do is take those plans, that dream that was put together and those concepts, and say what can begin to start making the facility of amenity usage facility.
So we do have plans. I mean, they're rough plans.
They're rough.
I don't know whether, I guess that'd be Debbie, has some, and Debbie, so if you can address that, but also then move into the issue of the Stagecoach Trail and the risk of overage that we talked about before while we've got you.
Sure. So we do have some plans, and Mike Pig and I sat down and looked at what do we need to actually make this so that our community can start using it. Parking lots, bathrooms, some of those really rudimentary things just to make it usable for the community. So it'd be kind of that baseline. It wouldn't be a lot of docks. It wouldn't be a lot of picnic shelters. It would be kind of that initial work to get people there and swimming and boating.
And so you're supposing, based on other work that you've done to do the parking lots, the restrooms,
Right.
those sort of things. But has that number changed with inflation or whatever? Is it going to get you what you think that you need for those rudimentary needs?
It will get us what we need to at least start allowing people to use the reservoir, yes.
And then if you're basing this first year on $6 million, then what are you planning for the next year or the year after that?
Well, that's Mike's deal.
Oh, that's Mike's.
No, we've talked about this, and you can get up in a minute. We really need to work on our private-public partnership on this. I think as soon as we get the lakes or the reservoirs built, as soon as we get a parking lot and we get bathrooms and people are using it, we hope to get some partners that are working with us to build some of those picnic shelters and boat docks and
Perfect.
that sort of thing, so.
Thank you.
Did you want to add?
No, I think you did great.
As always.
So I'm going to defer to Wyeth on the next one. I know. Did you see
that? So Mayor and Council, on the Stagecoach Trail, the number, how we got to the 5.5 million that we're working with today was with a fair amount of pre-design that was done for the project leading up to getting it into the, re-updating it basically in the CIP and then working on the bond effort and actually applying, going through the TA grant application. We had to have all that information for that earlier this year. So I guess, in terms of what we are working with right now and the estimates and what we've put in there for increase and such is as accurate as we can be based on everything we know today for that project. And that's what we had to bring to MDT and Federal Highways to get the grant approved, which occurred at the Transportation Commission just in October. So.
Councilor Burrow, I want on this issue of the
Can I
overage.
ask a follow-up?
Please.
I am way outside of my scientific understanding here, so this is probably going to be a convoluted question. But when council funded the parking lot at Castle Rock Park, it was based on some preliminary assumptions of cost. And then when the Parks Department dug deeper into it, there were all sorts of soil problems that drove up the costs that were not foreseen. That's what I'm trying to understand, is have we done the work, like actually looking at, the rims move all the time. So how deep have we gone to know that this is kind of a high level number? Or, kind of, what's the likelihood that when we start moving dirt, we will find costs that weren't anticipated? I don't think that's a reason, by the way, not to do it. I'm just trying to understand the risk.
Yeah, and I guess there's certainly always the potential that when we get into it, into more and more depth, that we're gonna find something that we weren't aware of. I guess we worked with an engineering firm to develop the estimate and the information we have to date. And also in terms of even looking at the alignment and the location of it along the Zimmerman Trail and then up through the rims there. So, yeah, I can't say, I guess, more in terms of the way the grant is set up is the design, the rest of the design and construction is part of the grant. So that's what's funding the next steps beyond where we are today.
Let me just quickly ask a follow-up, and maybe this is a better way to ask the question. Does the grant as proposed, or the project as proposed, include some stabilization? Like, is that assumed that we'll have to do a little bit to shore up some of that ground?
I'd have to look at in terms of the grant details, to look at how, it's the construction.
Debbie, you're the engineer. I just want to make sure you didn't want to comment further. In particular, trails aren't roads.
Right, that's exactly right. So it's not a parking lot, it's not a road, we're not going to be driving on it. So the geotech is a lot less important on a trail. The subgrade, we go down 8 inches, not 3 feet. So it is a lot less important to do that. However, I do believe that if we're going to put people down in there, we need to look at, do we have falling hazards? Do we have concerns about it, sloughing off, that sort of thing? And that was, we spent a lot of time up there when it was originally looked at to make sure we had a good spot to go. The route there was a lot of time taken on that route to make sure that we had good grades and that it fit within kind of the topography that was there. So I don't think the risk is as high as it would be if this was a road or if this was something deep that we were going into.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Keep moving down. Councilor Boyette and Councilor Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Wyatt, I see you have it for FY25, the 705,000. Can we put it FY26, 27, or is it dependent on the grant that we have to do it within a certain amount of time? Could you explain that?
Yes, Councilmember Boyette and Mayor and Council, and actually this came up at the Budget Committee discussion as well last week. The grant, so we're at the point literally of beginning, moving the project forward. We've gotten all the approvals. So you have to, as you spend the TA grant, you have to spend your match. So you really have to have it ready to go literally next year, calendar year 24, as we go into this to be able to complete it. We can't really wait and say, well, we're going to have part of the match this year and part next year, because then it could end up, we can't move forward if we're waiting to, allocate further match.
So then it comes up to us to figure out where we're going to get money, either not the South Park pool or the West End, or do this. And that's what it comes down to. But we need to either do it or don't do it, right?
Correct. Yeah. At this point, right, we've got everything in place to move forward and look at that. And I think, we are looking at a couple, as Andy mentioned, we are looking at a trail stewardship grant for another 100,000. We're, TrailNet's looking at options. We're trying to get that number as small as possible for the city portion.
Councilor Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple quick comments or questions, and then I'll save my big ideas and that kind of stuff for after public comment. Andy, you said that the 25th Street Bridge was going to all grant funding. I think we had $500,000 in there from DVP. Is that classified as a grant, or are we saying we won't use that?
So I will have to confirm that. My understanding, though, is that the grant that we applied for would be 100% grant funded.
Okay.
So we would not have any,
We wouldn't need that.
not use any downtown TIF funding, no.
All right, thank you. The other thing was on Poly Vista Park. Now, the last year we went through the CIP process. We had $200,000 in there, which I think you had up here, for the parking lot and possibly some paths around there. And we reallocated two projects or rescheduled two projects. I think I had written down Spring Creek and Evergreen Park irrigation, deferred them $300,000 to put those monies towards Poly Vista as well. And we've missed that a couple times now. I just don't want to lose sight of that because that's a good $300,000 that we were supposed to be using to match for the playground and or additional accessible paths along there. So I think we have $300,000 that we've already allocated for part of that match. And it looks like you kind of agreed with that and just forgot it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Councilman Rupes, you have told us that a couple of times and I did miss it. So I've got it written down now. We'll get it adjusted.
So Mike, can you kind of summarize where we're at? You'd identified a couple $100,000 that we already had set aside, plus this $300 million gets us to excess of $500,000 to something over $500,000. Is that where we're at there?
Correct.
And related to that is I know we've made commitments to the Landon's Legacy. What do we have to come up in order to meet our commitment? I know they had $1 million of new their own playground commitment, right? So is that our target? I mean, to get to that million, and now we're at something over $500,000, or?
So this year's target is the 520,000, actually. 220 goes into the infrastructure of the parking lot and the accessible route to the playground. And then Councilman Rupes was right. We moved some other monies around, changed some projects around, and then that money became available to match their money that they were coming forward for the playground. The $1 million that's in there is my understanding that is to match the next grant for which would be phase 3, which would be the splash pad.
Okay, and we haven't made a commitment to Landon's Legacy about a splash pad or anything else, but we have about this 550 or 520. Is that a correct statement? And we want to make sure that that happens. Is Councilman Ripsos?
Yes. So actually, I think what was always shown on the CIP was $1 million for Poly Vista Park for the playground, and it was just assumed that would always all be the Landon's Legacy side of things. The city has never actually formally made a commitment to help match that. We did say, though, when we deferred some of these projects to get that 300, that we would be acting in good faith on as being part of that match, right? So that would get us in that 500 range. They, last I heard, had about $400,000 already raised towards that. So we're pretty close to the $1 million necessary, estimated to do that playground. Right. Okay. And then we haven't started talking about splash pad yet. That's all.
But if we commit this 520, are both of you comfortable that we have met whatever moral obligation or whatever we've suggested Landon's Legacy?
Well, we've certainly met what we suggested in Landon's Legacy. I'll let you decide whether or not having them raise, more than 50% for the playground is the right moral decision or not. But
right.
we might be short on that 50-50 match if that's where we're trying to go for.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Andy, I have just a quick question for you. Has the city hired a grant administrator, grant manager at this point? I feel like I've heard rumblings, but yes?
Yes, we have, and he has submitted at least one grant application, I think maybe two, okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yep.
So I'm asking that in the context of, I think in general, this looks good. I think we're not going to come up with what to do with this ESPERA money in the next 3 hours or 3 weeks, probably. I mean, I think it's going to take our community a little bit of time. The reason I'm asking about the grant administrator is that when the federal lobbyists were in town, in the meeting that they had with council members, I asked them if there's anything they can think of to fund South Pool in all of their breadth of knowledge. And they basically said, absolutely not. There's just nothing. So I think I don't want to set unrealistic expectations that we can go out for a grant for South Pool, but I do think there might be a much better chance at a grant or taking another run at the state legislature for the West End Reservoir. I think, so I would like to have a conversation at some point with the grant administrator and see kind of what they're seeing as well. But that would be, in my mind, the way to move forward is focus the bonding capacity on South Pool and try and work either with the state legislature again, maybe second round we get lucky again, or going out for some kind of a grant for that. I think there's just more opportunities for conservation and kind of all of the things that get umbrellaed underneath that project. So those are my thoughts. Oh, and we definitely need to move forward with Stagecoach Trail, in my opinion. So $700,000 is a drop in the bucket for that grant of, are we going to really leave millions of dollars sitting on the table? I can't believe our community would do that. So finding that capacity, hopefully within the general fund in this next year, fingers crossed. You can do it, Andy. I know you can.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's get public comment, and then we'll kick it back to the council for further direction. Is there any public comment on our capital improvement plan number 4? Seeing no one coming forward, we'll, oh no, okay, sorry.
You don't want to hear from me? You know what I'm going to say. I'm Christy Drake. I live at 2950 Weldon Place, and I'm here on behalf of Billings TrailNet. And just wanted to reiterate that the Skyline Trail, or Stagecoach Trail, is such an important connection with the heights, with the rims. It would get people from the valley up to the rims. And the majority of people that we talk to, and I hear from the public all the time, it's not just our members, say that the Stagecoach Trail is such an important thing. So it is the number one thing that we're focusing on at Billings TrailNet. With it being nearly 85% funded, it would be ridiculous to give that money back. So while we don't want to tap all of our resources, we're committed to helping in any way we can, and so we would like to be able to save our resources for other projects that you all need us for. So, but I just wanted to let you know we're in full support of it, and we'll do whatever we can to help.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Don't see any questions for Christy, so thanks. Any other public comment on this? No one's online, so no one's with us, so we'll close the public comment period on item number 5. Council, you've heard some of the specific issues. Councilmember Rupsis?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have 3 basic thoughts as we're thinking of this. Firstly, I think our highest priority has to be on repairing, replacing the existing aging facilities. So that's not only South Park Pool, but North Park Center and Zimmerman Center. I think all 3 of those need to be included before we start talking about adding new things to the community. And as awesome and as the water reservoirs and the amenities there will be, they're new things, and we will get some benefit of just having a trail around there. So I prefer to focus on repairing those existing things first. Second thought related to that, I think we should have a conversation. We do have one option on the table for 1 more year to use Park District 1 and the bonding capacity that exists through Park District 1 to do those things that we have historically used Park District 1 for over the lifespan of its 12 years or wherever it's been. And that is to bond for those specific projects, South Park Pool, North Park Center, and Zimmerman Center. Those are fully within the life cycle replacement kind of scope of what we've used Park District 1 for. We could bond for that as its last and final act and then use Park District 1 only to pay the debt service on that while they go away. It's a fraction of what the bond was on the election, and it specifically focused, as I said, on just repair and replace. So I think that is worthy of at least a conversation. Of course, that would require some pretty aggressive planning this year to get the designs done for those facilities. I'm sure we could adjust some projects if necessary to make that happen under that deadline. Because they would have to be issued before December 1st or so, and Andy would need a couple months to sell the bond. So we're really talking that September timeframe to have that. anyway, I think that's something that we should talk about. And third thing I'd like to say is I plan on, as we go through the budget process this year, proposing that we dedicate 4 mills to ongoing incremental development in the parks. It's going to be a very slow and steady way to get through some of these projects. Smaller projects that were on the bonds. We're not going to build community centers in Castle Rock or Centennial, certainly. But we can do things like get the playground put in at Centennial and get pickleball courts at Castle Rock and do some of these other things that we've just been deferring for a long, long time. So I plan on introducing that amendment. 4 mills will give us about $1 million a year at this current mill rate. And I think in the first year, we could do the Stagecoach Trail and the rest of that match to get the playground built at Poly Vista. And those would be my highest priorities to do those things in the 4 mills from the first year. And then going on from that, of course, it's a broader conversation of how do we allocate those funds every year. But I'd like to have that dedicated. We know that we're going to have potential match options for TAP grants or match requirements for TAP grants. We know we've got a lot of backlog projects around the community. It's going to take us a long time, and we'll end up spending more than we would have if we just passed the bond. But you know, that decision is passed. We're moving forward. What can we do? And I'd like to. I will be proposing that as we get into the budget cycle. So hopefully to take that weight off of Andy's shoulders from having to do that himself. I'll put that in there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Rupsis. That I enthusiastically endorse what you're proposing. I was going to talk about South Park Pool as well, and say that in terms of facilities that the city owns in our city, that's probably one of the poorest condition. Although now that you mention it, probably the North Park community, well, building, it's sort of a community center, not really, but and the Zimmerman Center also are close rivals. So, you know, it does send a message to people, then they get it very loud and clear in the south side, is that, you know, the city isn't really taking care of people in this neighborhood. And so it sends a message to people, why should I reinvest in my house? Why, you know, there's not a future here. It just creates a cycle that sort of reinforces itself. And so, you know, with our focus on public safety and everything, I think this is a really great way to dedicate some resources, North Park being the other location as well. I think that would be really great. And then I think the other point that was discussed in the budget committee was, leveraging just a little bit of money for our trails, and so much of the funding comes elsewhere. And trails, you know, when the 2017 comp plan was done, trails ranked in the survey from the community as being, you know, one of those that's most valued. And so I think that's a really great way for us to move that forward. So, but excellent ideas. I look forward to having the opportunity to vote on those.
Okay, thank you. I guess what I would prioritize is the Stagecoach Trail. We cannot leave that money on the table. Generally, I like the recommendations of the Budget Committee and staff that was laid out in the staff report. So prioritizing the Stagecoach Trail, I agree with the Budget Committee on prioritizing the South Park Pool over the West End Reservoir. I would keep the rec center in there just as sort of a placeholder, only using Sabura dollars, with the possible sweetening of $5 million for private donations, or some amount for private donations. I don't think we want to send a message to the community that this can be built without private dollars. And so what that dollar amount is, I don't know, but it's a lot less than what we were talking about before, of course, but some sort of placeholder for private donations, call it $5 million. And then lastly, I would caution us against, you know, with all due respect to Councilmember Rupsis, of the replacement of the North Park Rec Center and the Pioneer Park Rec Center, just because those are existing facilities. And because although it sounds good to say, well, we should replace our existing before having new stuff, I think the test should just be one of greatest good for the greatest number, whatever that utility might be. It might be to replace those facilities, but there are other places that we have nothing in our community, and it might be that more people are benefited by having something than replacing what now is functioning but not nice, which we certainly recognize that. So anyway, we need to be better, I think, about trying to establish objective standards for prioritizing dollars, especially after the defeat of the bond. We're going to have to, I don't know, we're going to have to somehow make that, put it into a computer, have it spit it out, and then it'll certainly be accurate. So anyway, I'm cautious when I hear just general concepts like that don't deal with the details of individual situations. So anyway, would be my thoughts. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yeah, I agree with the staff recommendations, and I thank the Budget Committee for their work in looking into the details on this and their recommendation for South Park Pool over the West End Reservoir. I'm going to speak to the Sabura streets. We need to have SIDs on those properties that are benefiting. Gosh, we have been through a lot in discussions over unimproved streets in Sabura, but I've had people say to me, constituents have called me and said, why do I have to pay for these street lights? People are driving up and down my street that don't live in my neighborhood, and I don't want to pay for lights that other people are benefiting from. And I say to them, do you not ever drive anywhere else but your own street? We all benefit from streets. The streets need to be improved. And having an SID on your property is just a piece of what you have to do to have a community. My grandfather paid his SID off, years ago, and the sidewalks are still there. So, I just don't think it should be 100% Sabura money. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts, Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering, how do you see us proceeding? Do we pick one at a time and go through and kind of just raise hands, or do we vote as a whole, or?
Good question. I guess if somebody thinks wants to disagree with what they're hearing and wants a vote on something, yes, we need to have that vote. I wouldn't know what to have a vote on, though, unless you identify points of disagreement. If it seems to be kind of a consensus or a clear majority, we'll let it to staff to just make that conclusion. But if you're hearing something you disagree with and want to make a vote, we should do that. Anybody want to have a vote on something?
I have a question.
Oh, Councilmember Ripsis, thank you. Or I'm sorry, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. Mayor, and you could probably answer this because do you understand this, the Poly Vista, that is the $1 million that they're having in the CFP, that money is all raised already. Do I understand that correctly? Between us, it's already been put aside and what they've already raised?
No, I think they are in process, and I believe Councilmember Ripsis, I'll let him speak for himself, earlier said they'd raised about $400,000 of their $1 million goal.
Okay, but we've already, our portion of it, we're not adding any more money to that.
Again, Councilmember Ripsis can correct me, but my understanding is that they'd be responsible for the playground at about $1 million, but that what we've indicated in the past is, hey, if you put up $1, we'll put up $1. And we've got about 520 set aside, but that leaves us 480 short of getting to their $1 million contribution. Councilmember Ripsis, did I have that correct?
Pretty much, but of that 520, 220 was for the parking lot. So as far as the playground goes, we're at 300. However you wanted to do that match, what we really need essentially is 1.2 between the playground and the parking lot. So do you kind of figure out?
I thought there was, I didn't realize that it wasn't a commitment to match dollar for dollar for a project there. And so I'd like to see kind of the ground rules on what we're doing with them before we start committing any new money to them, because the money's just not there to do a whole match. That's the only question I have on that. On the West End Reservoir, I do think it should stay in there only not so much for debt and general fund, but really to see if we can get the state legislature help. Or I'd like to see this looked at through, third party people looking at maybe developing it outside of what the city does, and maybe they actually manage it, whether it's a RV park or some type of amenity. The other consideration is like some PMDs. This is going to be a great little regional park, but it also is going to give a lot of homeowners around the area a lot of benefit to just walk right to the lake. This may be an area that you look at some kind of district to fund some of the minor improvements, the shelters, some of the trails, things like that. On the South Park pool, I think we need to really consider a lot of different things about the pool. I mean, we had the North Park pool there, and it got taken away. I don't know what impact that had in the community there as far as losing the pool. Sometimes amenities change and stuff. I'd like to know what the usage of that pool is and whether or not it really still needs to exist. The Heights has not had a pool, for a long time. And, we did get someone to donate and come in and build a pool up there. So that's maybe something that we have a lot of community partners that build different things around, and maybe they would like to do something like that in the South Park. But I think we need to really determine if that pool is what the usage of that pool is and how much is needed. Some of these others, like the 20th Street bid, they're grant funded. I don't think there's any reason why we wouldn't lay it in there. I agree with the Stagecoach Trail because that's a lot of money that we'd lose out on. It's kind of already down the road. But I am concerned about it. I don't think I agree so much with the next 4 mil, setting aside 4 mils to get $1 million, because I believe, and Andy, this is a question to you. We moved the PD1 money into the general fund. And so like 1.3 to 1.4 million of that was actually set aside for capital improvements. So we're already doing over $1 million now in park improvements that need to be done. And so I guess, Tom, if I understand that correctly, be add another $1 million to that. But Andy, do you know if those funds are being kind of put aside in a separate fund for the Parks Department to utilize per the kind of the rules of the PD1 funding standards? Do you know if that's the way that is operating?
Yeah, Councilmember Neese, Mayor and Council, we, at least for 24, because that's the only year we've done so far, that we're structuring it as just the same way it funded with PD1, except it's just a transfer from the general fund. So it is set aside and designated for parks. It didn't increase though. I mean, it's still that 1.3, 1.5 million for park development, same as it was in the last few years.
Okay, I thought the council had approved like a 3% increase on that every year into that fund, so that the capital funds would be growing 3% a year.
If my recollection is correct, that did occur, but only a couple of years ago. So it was 1.3. It's not quite to 1.5 at this point. Okay,
so it is increasing. Okay. And then the only other question I have about the rec center is, there's a lot of improvements down there that need to be done still in that whole suburban area. And maybe a rec center is not what's going to be done. Maybe it'll be spent on infrastructure that's going to, build that tax base overall. Do we know, have we heard from the suburban if they're still planning to pursue a rec center, or are they going to focus on more towards business development and other infrastructure?
You want to comment on that, Chris? Because I've had a conversation with Dick Zier, and you probably have too. My understanding is, yes, that is something they want to do. I haven't met with their whole board or anything like that, but he is their chairperson. Chris, do you have any different information on that?
Got it.
Chris agrees.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick clarification there. Councilmember Neese suggested that about $1.5 million was right now being used for park development. Just to clarify, that is just life cycle replacement stuff. That's maintenance and repair, replacing playgrounds that are falling apart or tennis courts that need to be resurfaced. There's no new development there. And the reason that we have this big backlog is because we've never allocated monies specifically for new development to keep up with our growing population and increasing demands on the parks. So when I propose that during the budget session, it will be $4 million specifically dedicated to new parks and trails amenity development in the community.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Councilor Burgillick.
Question for Chris. I think December 11th is when we have, we're going to be at least brought forward for a vote. Is the staff going to be changing the CIP before it's brought back to us then, or based on discussion we're having, or are we just, we've already received it, we just need to amend it at that meeting?
I should have thought about this before tonight. I had envisioned that you guys would give me perfect, clear direction to walk out here to bring back an amended CIP. I think there's probably two realistic options here that would go smoothest. One is I don't change anything, and you guys make amendments to the CIP. I could put together what's in the presentation as a package amendment. That'd be easy. Or we could go through project by project. That doesn't seem terribly efficient. The other thing I'm thinking could work is I could amend the CIP to reflect the recommendations that were presented tonight, and then we could start from there. So I think
I would recommend the second option.
Yeah.
Does anybody disagree with that?
Okay.
No.
So that's
Number
what I
two.
will do.
Yeah.
I'll try to capture what your comments were. I will not make adjustments based upon one-off comments, but I won't disregard them either. I'll say, hey, here were some suggestions. They're not in the CIP. You guys can hash it out if you want. But that's kind of my approach.
Okay, I think that sounds good. There's been a lot of agreement on stuff, not everything necessarily, but a lot of stuff. I think most of it. So, okay, we've had public comment. Are we ready to call it a wrap on item number 4? Looks like it. So, Chris, item number 5, upcoming agenda items.
Yes, so we have going forward, so next week on your agenda is, there are 4 action items. We got a couple of annexations. One that is on Lincoln Lane. So you've got the resolution of annexation, the first reading on zoning, and then the ward change. And then you have another one on Avenue D. Then you've got a downtown urban renewal TIF application. That's critical. That is tied to the yesteryear's building. So that the downtown partnership's been working on that one for a while. It is, in a nutshell, it's relocation expenses to move yesteryears out of that location and into, they're going to occupy the basement or the downstairs, the lowest level space at Alberta Bear across the street. Alberta Bear, I'm sorry. Hart Albin. Thanks. At Hart Albin. So that's there. And then lastly, you've got the Big Sky passenger rail decision if you're going to join that group and pay the $6,000 to be a member of that group. Then we've talked earlier about December 4. We will work on that focus. And then the 11th, we've been talking a whole lot about tonight. The big thing on the 11th is adopting the capital improvement plan, the ERP, and the TRP. And I think that those are really the highlights for the next couple, 2-3 meetings.
Good. Okay. Any questions for Chris? Any public comment? Public comment is closed on item number 5. Any items of council discussion? Any public comment on non-agenda items? Anybody opposed to adjourning? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.